Hey everyone, welcome to my stream this week. This week we're going to be talking about hydration. It's really a continuation of what we were doing last week. In preparation for this stream, I actually looked at a previous stream I did on hydration. This is not the first time that I've done a hydration. I did hydration originally, I'd say in October, maybe. But looking back, it wasn't a very well-viewed stream, funny enough. But it did actually cover a lot of the stuff we covered last week too, because in order to get to talking about hydration, you got to have a solid foundation in basically how the whole render tree works to actually kind of get to it. It's like that layer on top. Anyways, yeah, if you're here, come say hi in the chat. Hello, Lauren. I'm excited to be talking about it though, because I think there's still a lot of confusion. I've been meaning to write another article. I've written a few articles by this point, but especially a lot of the stuff I've been reading recently, it introduces a lot of new ideas, but it's not really clear where the ideas overlap or, where what the differences are between the different perspectives. And I think part of this is kind of a rapidly evolving thing. Hydration is really a difficult thing to just like nail down because it's a whole range of solutions essentially. And one thing that I've kind of noting and why I've been kind of setting up a sort of framework around talking about it is there are certain characteristics that seems to transcend all the different approaches. And I'm hoping through exploring that, it'll be easier to not only understand what it is, but also to be able to kind of like characterize it and understand, like when someone says resumable or partial, what it actually means and what the impact of those decisions or architectures are. Anyways, this week to help me, just gonna say hi to a few people here. Lol, okay. I've got Dan again joining me, so he's gonna help hopefully ask those clarifying questions that we all need, so we can make it clear, because I tend to kind of go down my specific paths. But I'm as I said, I'm pretty excited about this one because I think hydration is a super interesting topic. Indirectly, it's been what I've been exploring on stream for the last 4 months or so, since January. So this really kind of just ties a lot of those pieces together. Anyways, without any further ado, I'm going to invite Dan onto the stream here. Hey, Dan. Hey. How you doing this week?
Doing good. It's been a fun week. I've been thinking about hydration myself. I started getting involved in Astro like officially this week. So now I've got solid hydration and Astro hydration, which is a lot of fun. And yeah, no, I'm really excited about this topic too. Firstly, like, can we just notice that 2 years ago, it seems like everyone was happy with Next and no one cared about hydration?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what circles you're in, but yes, I think there was a perception of that. I will admit, it was about 2 years ago that I was in that perspective where I didn't value the problem space. I mean, I noticed there was a problem. It's the best way to put it. I was doing solid. I was doing client-side rendering, and I was like, why are all your SSR sites so freaking slow? That's where I was. So it wasn't that I did that I was like super stoked about Next per se, but I just assumed that it was because SSR was slow and that like whatever they were doing must be really dumb. That was kind of where I was. I've realized since then that it is a very complicated problem to solve, and there are benefits, real benefits, when you actually look at it with a wider view. When you think about the web in terms of accessibility or like access, when you talk about different devices, different networks, there is actually a really important story to be here. And especially when you're talking about like large companies that have to work on a global scale. That's why hydration is coming from companies like eBay,
Facebook,
or Google, or like this. It's because these are problems that you need to consider even more so when you scale up and when you want to reach the widest audiences. Anyway, we'll get more into that. I think maybe we can. What are we doing here? We're doing a little preamble. A few people have joined on. I feel sorry for those who haven't joined on yet, because this is, as I said, going to be a good one. So Let's get started on this week in
This
JavaScript.
is my like sit back and relax part of the stream.
Yeah, well, just to start, there was actually a few things this week. I didn't think there was at first because I was kind of like, not every week is as good as other weeks. Not every week's last week, so to speak, or whatnot. But there was a few things, and the first one that came across for me was, this. Hey, Caleb.
I remember this when I used Next. This was weird.
Right, and the funny thing is, we hit this on stream a couple weeks ago, and everyone who uses Next knows this. But I don't. It was just so funny. The timing was at the same time. Like 2 weeks later, suddenly this push goes out. I know it probably had nothing to do with it, but anyone who joined the stream remember that. I remade that Hacker News app in like nth frameworks at this point, and it is pretty easy. It doesn't take much work, but I think to watch me take like a React example, like already pre-formatted React example in Remix, and then you like literally go through and have to like first not understand what's going on, and then like basically like just massage all the links and all the things throughout the app. It was definitely a little doing. The funny thing is, stuff like this doesn't bug me at all. Like that's just like it's just subtle kind of like code style. Like who cares? If there was an actual real problem, architecturally or something with Next, then I'd have an issue. But it's just funny because like for a lot of people, those are the kind of things that like someone wrote in the comments to this. It's like, Ryan, if they had released this, it would have made your stream half as long. I mean, yes, I was doing a lot of manual code editing, but I hope I wasn't that slow.
Something kind of is funny about you'll be able to opt into this new behavior. You mean like you'll be able to remove a tag? Like, cool.
It's fine. I think this is great. So
great
this
job,
one,
next team, monumental engineering decision.
Right. So this one, this is the fun part about doing this stuff and doing the stream and being involved in these kind of things, is you just kind of feel like you're just like right there as stuff happens. Like when we got the streaming compression on the Netlify edge, and now Next has got rid of those link tags. So I love how this just keeps on evolving.
They removed it because of you.
No, they didn't. No. It's just funny. The timing was like just perfect. So there's a few people who are just like flagging me in the mentions on this one, just because it was like literally like it felt like it was like the week after. Anyway, let's keep on going. What else was there? Yeah, actually, I got a little article post. For me, actually, this week started here, and I know nothing about this. There's this long thread, and some people said this thread is amazing, and I mean, it looks like people thought it was amazing. I actually didn't like this one. I don't know why I didn't. Oh, do you know why I didn't? I mean, now I liked it. Doesn't matter. Because I have no context here. I joined Tech Twitter like 2 years ago. And what this whole long thread is talking about is about how Tech Twitter is not what it used to be, and how it's been replaced with a bunch of grifters. Prolific open source authors were shown by the community and went dark. Even famous ones went not being activists, reduced their commitment to community, blah, 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 rise of tech influencers, monetizers. And it's so funny because this is probably all true, but this was the Twitter that I entered into. As I said, I joined Twitter in like December 2019. So I just thought this was what Twitter was. You kind of join, the tech influencers are like saying what's going on, and you try and have a conversation and you get shut out. Like that's what I thought Twitter was. So it's interesting to see that it wasn't. Yeah. Maybe there was some pretty cool circles at some point that I don't know.
I don't think there is a tech Twitter. Everyone has their own siloed tech Twitter. Tech is, a big subcategory on Twitter, and yeah, I guess like even I don't know what is front end Twitter, like Dan Abramov and like who else? Amelia Watberger, and like I don't know, like what is front end Twitter?
Yeah, or memes with Adam Rakis.
Right. Yeah. Like I don't know if you can just label tech Twitter as this like one thing, but it's interesting.
But yeah, I mean, the death of conferences, and this ties in. Maybe it's just the timing with COVID. Not be able to galvanize, like people around certain types of personalities, and in the meanwhile, we, things are just kind of, I don't know.
this interests me a lot because my career started during COVID, so I never went to a tech conference.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So we're the wrong people to talk about this because I wasn't involved, like at all. But yeah, this thread apparently is right on, and they describe it to a T. But I don't really know anything about this because everything I read here seems true, but I just assumed Twitter was always like this. So yeah, this is a good thread, especially if you've been around for a while. You can kind of reminisce or something. But this is basically how my week started. Then, well, my weekend leading into it was I wrote this article, and it kind of plays off this whole sites versus apps thing. Honestly, it talks about the single page app versus the multi-page app thing. I've been waiting to write this article because I'm so excited about what, where Marco has been doing and how it's actually showing like the ability and to kind of transcend perhaps typical MPA. And we might even see a little bit more of that tonight. I got a little surprise for you all. But also on the solid side, using things like Astro, like this stuff's starting to kind of blend together. And even though I wrote this article, is a very like philosophical, juxtaposition between like the polar opposites. The whole point was this is if you haven't checked it out, follow me. This is like, I don't know. This is like what I've been building towards. I wanted to see if I could take two really sort of opposite ideas, opposite values, and make them performant. This is kind of what I always talk about, in this case, like neither of them have the VDOM, for example, but it's not about the VDOM or not the VDOM or whatever. Or about SPA or single page app. It's about finding the patterns and the ways to model data in a way that can be performant, enjoyable to build apps, all those things. And being able to work on two frameworks is an amazing opportunity to get the understanding across the whole ecosystem. And this article is just kind of celebrating how that's kind of starting to finally come together to fruition, and just how cool that is. Obviously, it's a very me kind of thing, but just for anyone who's follows, that's big for me. But the funny thing is, this sort of and actually should mention, this is kind of a parody article or response to Swix's original Svelte for apps or Svelte for sites, React for apps. And in that article, he said something along the lines of like, some very smart people think the walls between apps and sites, isn't a thing, or it's, but, respectively, they're wrong, is what he wrote. And this was like 2 years ago. And I was already kind of planning to write the article that time. But yeah, it's taken me 2 years to write the response to that statement, because I wanted to be sure. I wanted to be able to prove it. And if you read that article, you can see that in a lot of ways, Marco has kind of changed the game, and even Astro, on the other hand, has changed the game, and we're seeing this reality of a potential convergence. So yeah, it's really exciting stuff. But as I said, the actual discussion is still going live, in different variations. Like this happened this week. Ryan Florence, there's no such thing. There's no such thing as a static website. Like, I mean, hate it or love it, every week you're going to get a tweet from the Remix guys that are just like, oh,
I love it. I think they're shit posting on purpose, and it's amazing.
Yeah, like it's like, you didn't say that, did you? And the thing is, because I mean, there are bits of truth in this thread if you go through it. There is, he's talking about like stuff isn't usually truly static, and that like it's not this like simple split like static, non-static. For a lot of things, right? And it's kind of interesting. And because right now, because of the way the edge is happening and this sort of dynamics, the new static and this whole thing, and even Remix in a sense, how it positions itself, this all makes sense. But I mean, there's a whole industry around static web generation and stuff. Like my man here from 11D, Zach Leatherman. And, this is sort of a subtweet of that, or that thread.
People don't get paid to work on SSG sites. Have you never been a WordPress freelancer? Like what? Like this is what we get paid to do.
Yeah, it came out somewhere in that thread, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, this is just like the opposite side. So two very extreme takes. And again, it's not it is a bit of the sites versus apps thing again. It's not completely, but it is a bit of this kind of discussion in a different way. I didn't reply to the tweet because sometimes it feels like stirring the pointless debates like this is a deliberate remix marketing strategy.
What? A marketing strategy on
Which
Twitter?
is sad as remix looks cool without needing to disparage Jamstack static, whatever. And yeah, I mean,
Well,
yeah,
remix is disparaging themselves because if you say nothing is static, you better not remove that script tag and rely on your forms.
well, yeah, maybe. I mean, that is an interesting perspective. But I mean, I think they're talking more about the rendering versus like it's caching versus non-caching. The remix perspective, which is a reasonable one, is that if you cache everything, that's like the same as being static, more or less. Or it's not. Like it's like static isn't a real thing. It's just where you put the cache is essentially the mentality.
Yeah, I think that was actually like the actually good part of the discussion, which is like, look, if we're using SSR and we're caching all the time, the line between SSR and SSG blends, and I thought that was valuable.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's this is a fun debate. As I said, it's not quite the app versus site one, but it is fringing on that. And I mean, this marketing thing has got to be true because honestly, I feel like every week Remix has like a new statement, and I'm just like, oh man, what's going on here? Sometimes they even bug me, like they're on the other side. Like it's just like I don't know what the marketing strategy is. If it's just kind of like shake things up by a bunch of people off. I mean, I guess it's working. It's, you know, you know how I respond to that stuff. I'm just like, okay, you say that, I'll give you a benchmark, a ruthless benchmark. That's usually what I do. Like someone makes some kind of performance claim or something, I'll just be like, okay, let me come up with a situation.
You can't respond rationally to a tweet like this though, because it's so sort of, you know, no terms are defined. So what are you supposed to respond to?
Yeah, it's as I said. So it's the debate, and honestly, that if you missed it, this was also a couple days ago here, so it's fun. I don't know. Anyone in the chat have any thoughts?
Someone in the chat says interesting. So
yeah,
interesting. I would agree.
Is this what tech Twitter is? I already put this on there. I haven't noticed anything different in tech Twitter. Maybe this is tech Twitter's always been. I don't know. You know.
Well,
yeah.
Are we going to comment about Twitter's new owner, or is that sort of irrelevant to tech Twitter?
I mean, I guess it's fair, but I honestly have no opinions about Elon, except for I actually like the parody tweets better than anything. Like the one where he's going to buy React and remove the.
Oh yeah, I love that. Yeah, to respond to Caleb in the chat, like if you want Solid's Twitter shitpost marketing strategy, Oren is on it. He makes the best Twitter posts.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even pull it out. It's so funny because I was on the Solid account because I saw someone asked, you know, about the whole let count svelte thing, and I just gave them on. So I just put let count in different repls, and obviously just putting that code in doesn't do anything. It just like literally displays let count or something, or just does no op. But he took it the next level. Apparently, this unlocked the whole idea of what you can do as a meme. So yeah, I'm not going to go there right now. But yeah, if you want to see it, you look around, you'll find it. Okay, cool. And then yeah, let's keep on going. So site, app, static, real thing. I'm going to take a little break here because I want to talk about Solid for a moment before we can go on. Solid hit its 4th year in open source and our 100th contributor. It was like completely like just a weird timing thing. I was just like, there's a PR for some kind of typo thing, and I was like, oh man, I missed that in the release notes. Sure, okay. PRs like that, as much as some people probably think they're annoying or pesky. I love people who make PRs for like spelling mistakes and little things like that, because honestly, they're easy to merge. I miss something obviously, and I don't have time to go find it. If you go through the effort of pulling down the repo, forking it, and fixing that typo, like thank you. And it just so happened that I merged it, and then I'm like, wait, we have 100 contributors, and I'm like, wait, today's April 25th. Like literally, like it clicked on me that I'd been doing this for 4 years, And 100 contributors is not a lot. You go over to some of the even newer things that are kind of picking up like Astro and stuff. They have way more than 100 contributors probably at this point. Or it's just like for us and the main Solid project. Also, we moved a lot of stuff into other repos, but like there's a lot of technical stuff. Sometimes it's not easy to be able to contribute to the core library and whatnot, but just to have, people coming in and have spent the effort, I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity to be able to do this stuff. And it's funny, I just tweeted this just because I was like, wow, that's really cool. And, it just, yeah, honestly, it's been 6 years now altogether. And yeah, it's amazing.
Like part of what's so cool about this, like a lot of creative endeavors don't have this like self-documenting nature of it. I mean, you did music, I do music. Like you don't have this like 4-year anniversary of like learning guitar or something in the same way, because this is so inherently communal and documented. And it's almost like you have these like 100 people in the face pile as like witnesses to like, your own creative journey. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's so cool. And it ties into, I started writing around the same time and learning in public. Solid's completely documented right from the beginning. You can actually, like, not from the beginning, 2018, but in 2018, I was playing catch up. I was basically writing articles about how I approached, like, I write all about web components at the beginning and like how, like my philosophy for how to split state from container from Vue into 3 technologies. And it's so funny because you actually see the progression over time as you go through that, because at the beginning I was very, very much on web components. And that's the whole reason why Solid is componentless, which ended up being like the key innovation. So it's just kind of one of those, like, what's the term, serendipitous, like situations a bit where it just kind of worked out that way. But yeah, I mean, while I'm here, do a couple more Solid news things. I don't, that's probably not quite the right tweet. Steve was like, from Builder, quick party town, would start this post where he's just talking about how much fun he was having writing Solid. And he wrote a whole tweet thread on it. And I was like, oh man, this is so awesome. Thanks, Steve. And I'm like, what is he doing? And found out that David, community manager, had kind of been like, hey, Steve, kind of give me a little nudge. He's like, what's going to take to get the mitosis Solid integration out the door so that everyone can use mitosis, like generate different frameworks and get Solid in there officially. So that's what Steve was doing. He was working on the integration, and he was playing with Solid a bit and having a lot of fun with it. So yeah, that's awesome. We have the mitosis SDK, and another good one we had come out here is Motion One. People talk about
David has worked so hard on this. I just want to say, like, he's been working on this like day after day. This is really cool. And I'm not even like emotion. I don't need, like, I'm a GSAP fan, but like now I'm using this. Like I'm so impressed with all the effort that went into this.
Well, the thing is, animations are always tricky with declarative frameworks, and the reason for that is that animations are ephemeral, like they represent a transition.
Yeah.
And declarative frameworks are good at synchronization. They're like good at like the state reflects everything purposely.
That's why I was always so comfortable being like, oh, I'm doing imperative code, doing GSAP for animation, D3, whatever.
So yeah, this is really cool. Obviously, some frameworks have this kind of some stuff like this built in, but we aren't one of those frameworks. So having tools like this, it completes the story,
Also, no one really has this built in. This is like the next level.
Okay. I don't know anything about animations, which is partially why they're not built into Solid. So there you go.
Oh no, you do. You made use transition.
Yeah, those aren't animations. Those are.
I know. I always take an opportunity to meme on use transition.
Yeah, I mean, React named it. It is what it is. That ship has sailed. Even though like there was also transition group.
I'm still gonna meme about it. You can't stop me.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, yeah. The only other thing I want to mention before we move off Solid is the hackathon is done voting in 3 days. So if you want to help support the all the contributors who participated, go over to hack.solidjs.com and vote. This is your last chance to vote on it. There's $12,000 in prizes up on the line, so do go over there and vote.
We clearly inspired this like how do you pronounce it? Chakra UI hackathon.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
really cool
Yeah,
to see.
and Astro,
Astro
they
hack,
yeah, this is, honestly, I think we ran ours a little bit too long, a little bit. Maybe not the thing, but I feel like this last little section on the voting and all that has definitely been dragged out. I know we wanted to be sure, but yeah. So if I was to do this again, I would look at shortening the time. I actually like the long run hackathon.
We are going to do it again.
Yeah,
that's my vote, and yeah, we're going to run it better.
Yeah, I mean, I think the long run hackathon is actually really cool. I just think that it's probably like it was a little bit too long, but things we learned, but really cool. And yeah, so that's a solid JS update. What else we got this week in JavaScript? Syntax. See, people, if you want to talk about arguing,
this was weird. I actually followed this. So everyone's arguing about like how you do loops and all the frameworks, and I was like, this has run its course.
Well, no, I mean, this has gone for a while now, and I actually kind of played at this a little bit before that because I actually asked everyone, what if they could pick a different framework that's always most similar to, what would it be? And this was a trick question because, like, I don't know.
If you come from Svelte, it's going to look like Svelte. I came from Vue, it looked like Vue. So
yeah, so I mean, it's one of those things where, like, I think maybe this was the problem with that question, but I was interested if how many people the funny thing is I knew this question wouldn't do what I wanted it to exactly, but I wanted to see if it challenged people to think outside of that box. And that's what I want to do. Even with the syntax thing, it's mostly about challenging people to be like maybe see something different in a different light. And the syntax thing really started here, this loop thing. And honestly, I wasn't paying it. I usually ignore these threads because, like, they're stupid. I don't care that much about syntax, honestly. Like, I care about it a bit from ergonomic, but it's not even ergonomic. I care about it from a composition, mechanical standpoint, not from like most of the common, like, elements of it. I just I care about like how it works mechanically. So
do you know why I care about this?
What?
They got the code sample wrong in Vue and in Svelte, I believe. Definitely in Vue. The 4, it's V4. Have you never used Vue, guy? Like, who is this? They never used Vue.
Yeah, to be fair, my example isn't much better. I screwed up a couple things too. But yeah, I mean, this one got flagged because I think, was it Theo retweeted this, and then I saw it and I was like, okay, fine. I'm going to get pulled into this silly debate.
Oh, that guy, Eric? Oh no, I don't know him. Yeah, no, this was a really silly debate. I think this is the first thing you notice in a framework. Why is this what we talk about now?
Yeah, I mean, because what matters is how like that first couple steps. Like, if you're like, it's a thing. It's interesting. If it's about lowering the floor, making web development more accessible to beginners, making it easier, not have learning curve, all that kind of stuff. And it's important, but it's also like the thing that, like, it's not the only important thing. And so, I did what I do. I just was like, okay, let's compose. Let's look how this scales up. Yeah. And I think when this example came up, people are just like, what is going on with Vue? And to be fair, I didn't need to do the syntax exactly, but actually the right answer isn't actually much nicer. Like, I think, like, if I'm not putting the colon here, I'm putting the colon over here.
Well, what are you trying to do here in the Vue example?
Well, the problem is these aren't equivalent, but the Vue and the Svelte are actually close. I'm trying to take, in this case, it's wrong, but what I am doing here is taking item and aliasing it to name, which means that this is actually correct, I think. The other option would be vslot colon item.
I'm trying to look at the React example just so I see what you're trying to do.
Yes, the React example is not the same as the other two. This is my screw up. So in any case, you get into this zone with Vue. Like, if you had an index on your iteration, we'd be in the same place. We'd be like, let item name, let colon index this, and it just starts expanding out this way. Obviously, React, you just add an I here. It's just different priorities. And honestly, you still had to jump from that original code to this and rewrite all your loops. So essentially, like, I mean, it's not, they aren't actually all that different. I was more trying to, challenge people who came in who were like, especially on the kind of Vue and Svelte side, who were like, look how like sleek this is. Like just show them something like one step abstracted because it's not optimized that way.
The debate is so far from use. I mean, people are like, I think Theo said this, but Theo won't be offended if I call him out. He's like, the React example looks like JavaScript, so it's easier. And I'm like, do you think .map is the easiest thing for beginners to learn in JavaScript? Like, that's not a user-focused observation.
Right. And I think but the funny thing is like how quickly we leave the like simple stuff as soon as we start building stuff. Like it's all the same stuff. It doesn't really matter. I chose this example because I knew that Vue and Svelte were like a little bit rougher, which React is arguably rougher on the other side, just to kind of be like, are you still going to say Vue here? And the funny thing is the Vue people were like, yes, Vue. And I'm like, okay. Like,
do you know why I don't like the React example? You already know because I've talked to you about it. It has a function child.
Yeah, that bugs people, right?
Yeah.
But someone actually had a good argument. They said because it's like a single child, and when you have children, you could have multiple. They didn't like that. They'd rather it be a prop. So
yeah,
I mean,
look, like this is the same thing with the .map example. You can't argue that this is easier because it's JavaScript, because the idea of a function child in HTML looking template, that's not the easy thing to learn in JavaScript.
Right. So I mean, it's an interesting one, because I think what ends up happening here is it's unexpected. A lot of people going, how does that work? How can you pass a function in? Like people, and then once I explained it to them, they were like, wow, that is so good. Like so cool that you can do that. Because the cool thing about it is like once you get it, like you're like it's incredibly powerful and flexible. And like for me, honestly, my whole thing is, for my personal preference, I kind of get lazy and I forget what I know. I like all the time I have to like I'm getting old now or something. And I just can't remember all the different syntax magics, after a while.
Yeah,
like, I want to refer to the docs. So like if I have something that just like follows like one thing I do like about JSX is like once you like know that you can do JavaScript with it and have that mental model, like I don't have to remember anything. But
like, to be clear, like I'm now an avid solid user, but the reason to advocate for JSX is not because it looks like JavaScript. It's because of this argument that the things you have to learn are actually a small number of them that you can then use in many different ways. You can compose these ideas and you can reuse these ideas. And for that reason, you still have to learn new ideas, but those new ideas go further. Whereas in Vue, learning the concept of v-slot is not as powerful.
Right. So yeah, and I just for fun, I threw in Solid and Marco because I can. And
every time you show a Marco example, I'm like, can we do more of this?
Well, I mean, it's funny. You're one of the few people. Most people, I have a bunch of. There's even some people in the chat. They're just like, Solid's really cool. Marco makes me throw up in my mouth.
Marco makes me feel like we're in next gen web dev. I love it.
Yeah, I'm hopefully more people feel that way about it. But the syntax thing is silly. I actually wrote my thoughts on it. I think this is the thing, because this is a subtweet actually of Evan Yu, who tweeted something about like how we shouldn't argue about it. It's like talking about brain shape and like how it like maps to kind of like everyone has a different preference and a different wiring. And I can see that, but knowing that is why it's important, right? I said I've been poking with syntax the last few days because it's complicated. There are comfort and mechanical aspects. Ideally, I'd say it's like 80% subjective and not worth arguing over, especially since it's costly undertaking as a framework to roll your own. But like literally, they all did, right? But like Svelte or Marco or Vue, or like how many syntaxes does Vue have? Like how much effort goes into the code highlighters, linters, pretty printers, TypeScript, IDE integrations, and how much of this is for mechanical reasons, right? I don't. Sometimes it is, but not completely. So yeah, I mean, it's regardless of how we should say we shouldn't argue about it. Frameworks invest heavily in this area. It is definitely important. Like you can't just like you just kind of like shake it away, as being silly, because I mean, in a sense it is like the arguing on Twitter gets us nowhere. But on the other hand, like, as I said, I don't know how many official syntaxes are in Vue at this point, but I'm guessing there's like 5 or something. Like,
yeah, Vue does
options. Like there's original like
keep going. This is my original problem with Vue, actually.
Right, but like, okay, let's see. There's the like they have like a version that works just like in the browser as is. I don't know if that uses the option API. There's a composition API. There's
that's the options API with a string template.
String template, right? And then there's like their normal templates, and there's the JSX templates. And sorry, did I say ref sugar? Yeah. So I mean, I don't know. There's like 5 or 6.
They work together. That's why you can't like divide it into 5. You can use bits and pieces as you go.
Okay.
But yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's fine, because Vue has this amazing way of being everything to everyone.
Yeah.
So it makes sense, but I'm saying it's clearly important. like.
Oh, you're saying Evans like is not important when he's like implementing all of the syntaxes? Yeah.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I mean, it's fine.
What bothers me about this is people aren't saying this syntax is good for this subset of people. They're saying, I like this syntax. And someone else says, I like this syntax. And like, that's not valuable to me. I want to know who this syntax supports. Like in Theo's example, it's great for JavaScript power users. So like, that's a really valuable observation.
Yeah. So, and maybe that's the thing. Like, that's probably all Evan was actually saying, to be fair. It is a thing. We're not going to pretend like it's not. And actually, I've got one more topic for this week in JavaScript before I move on. The syntax thing was fun. This one just threw me completely out. What the hell was going on? And this one's actually going to tie in a bit to our
conversation. Yeah, I love this one because it's what we talked about.
Yeah, because like we learned all about first contentful paint and large contentful paint, and I was sitting there and I was playing with Astro. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I was like looking at the performance, and I was like, "What the hell are all these little things?" Me and Fred looked at it, and there's like thousands of these in that really bad example, like the really killer page. There's like thousands of these like little slices of script tags, and some of them are for Astro, but a bunch of them were Solid's hydration script being repeated for every island. And so somebody came from the Astro community, was like, "Let's just fix that." And I'm like, "Oh man, you would? Is it easy?" And he found a solution and got rid of them all, and everything got streamlined. And I was like, "Oh wow, this is so great!" Like, it's instead of having like, see, these are the Astro ones here at the end, but it was like that over here originally.
So yeah, shout out to Hippo. I believe he was the one who fixed that.
Yeah, see how it's all like this over here? He got rid of it. Look, and you could tell this is like way longer while it's like doing this timeline while it's doing all that. But this one is just like smooth, and that's how most things are. But look what happened to our little.
Walk me through this. What's happening in this example with the yellow? The yellow
is the scripts. If you zoomed into them, you'd see this is JavaScript execution. Purple is layout, and usually layout is trailed by like little green ones. You can't see which are paints. But this is the original Astro demo with all my script tags. I had a script tag for every island. And script tags that are inlined are blocking. We talked about this last week about how
the browser has to go run those every time
as it goes. So if you see this, layouts are getting interrupted. So they calculate the layout, paint, do the script tag. Calculate the layout, paint, do the script tag, layout, paint, and it actually breaks it up. So looks the first layout, paint, script tag, or layout paint thing happens here, and look what happened to the first contentful paint. It's way up here, and then this, like a little bit later, we get up, we do a few more, and we get the largest contentful paint right here.
Except there's way more contentful paints over there. What about those?
Like the rest of the page, well, it's because of the long page. Largest contentful paint is based on what's in Vue. So to get largest contentful paint, you only need to show what's on the screen. So this is the rest of the page. This page had what, like 1,400 comments. It doesn't matter. Like if the page is 100 times longer, you only need to load like 5% of the page to get largest contentful paint. So it would interrupt near the beginning, a few times, and then it would go, okay, here's our largest contentful paint. So you get first paint, so assuming that the beginning of the timeline when the HTML loading is all the same, you almost immediately get first paint, and then first contentful paint, and then large contentful paint is like a little bit after, and then the rest of the stuff finishes, and then we have our load event. Whereas after we fixed it and optimized it so that it was faster, look where first paint is now. It's at the end. It's because the browser did all its work all at the same time, and there's some little green right there. There's the green for the paint event. It's a slightly bigger paint event, and now here's first paint, contentful paint, and what it's down here. So it wasn't essentially, it did all the work up front and then painted everything, and the total time here is shorter. But because it had the way to do all 14,000 comments or whatever.
So from a user perspective, you're seeing stuff later.
Yes, and from the benchmarking perspective, you're seeing stuff later too, like from the Lighthouse scores.
So what exactly was the change? So at first we had little hydration scripts everywhere, and then you then you combine them and put it in the head. Like, what was that?
Exactly. Yeah, that's basically it. Like, I mean, let me see if I can pull it up. If I have it, Astro, Solid, Hacker News, Netlify thing. Let's just go to the main page.
I love how chat is still talking about syntax.
Of course, the syntax is the most important thing. All right. But like, let's go to a place where I know there's an island right here, where this toggle is. Okay, there's an island here, right? And if you look here, there's a script tag, which is the solid hydration bootstrap window HY events this. And every time you see an island in here and you look, you're going to see another one of these. See? Script.
Right. Yeah.
And so it gets to there and it stops. And the funny thing is, if I now show you the edge version of this, because I deployed Astro to the edge, this is where I was doing. I did a little upgrade.
Is this the fixed version?
Yeah, this is the fixed version. On the edge, you'll see we don't do that anymore. And what ends up happening is in the head, where there's still 1,000 Astro scripts, not that many in this one. You'll see that that script, maybe it's not here. Okay, it's essentially gets called as part of this process instead of being a separate script tag. So instead of having 1,000 scripts interrupt our page, we now have.
But it's up front, so.
Well, it ends up being in these script executions. But yes, it's essentially those. I think where it comes in, the scripts aren't blocking, like they're purposely like set to not be blocking, and essentially because of this, it doesn't block, and we get our full paint. But as I said, it scores lower. Generally speaking, even though the whole time's faster, it's just because we didn't interrupt it. And now on a normal page, being shorter is better, but in this case, because the page is so immense and we don't actually care about the last, few, who knows, 1,000 comments at the beginning, it's actually beneficial to have the script tag block and force the paint. And as I said, as this framework, I'd never do this intentionally, but it's just one of those funny things that I didn't realize and just accidentally chanced upon, to have a fix that makes something more efficient actually make it like benchmark worse.
Actually, definitely answer this question in chat. Does the script have to be doing something to like this example is, does console.log do the same trick, or does it have to be actually like doing something significant to get the browser to pay attention to it?
No, I think it's just console.log. If you saw what that script was that I was showing,
it was like a weak set. It was nothing.
It was nothing. It was like instantiate an object if it doesn't exist. And so the first time it actually did it, and the second time it just like go, oh, it exists. Like, and skip it. It's literally was no opping everywhere.
Yeah, I'm like 60% understanding at this stage, but
well, it's just because it falls in the flow. So it's going, hits it, stops, and goes, okay, well, while I'm processing, before I process this, I have to make sure everything's up to date.
Right. It basically, like when the browser like chills out, that's when it registers a paint.
Well, but it's not chilling out. It's actually kind of being forced to, because of the way of the browser rendering.
Yeah, I think that part is what I don't understand. Like what exactly?
We have to make sure. It's interesting because there are certain things that cause reflows, but I guess the way that it's implemented, what if the script needs to know about where it is on the page? Like, what if the script has to have knowledge? I think that's the whole point. It needs to actually make sure that the page is up to date before it's safe to execute the JavaScript script within it. Yeah, because the script can access the DOM. Sorry here. And the DOM has to be consistent. Yes, that's yes. I think we're typing and saying it at the exact same time. So like the browser has no choice. So, I mean, it makes a ton of sense, but it's just something that you accidentally come across. And it was like the secret to like our super fast page speeds on the stupid large page. I've corrected it. Unfortunately for Astro, that means we don't get the 90s anymore, for that thing. It's
I
still,
mean, it just shows that the Lighthouse benchmarks might not be your best judgment call.
right. Exactly. I think we get in the 80s or high 80s, still like an 88 or something. So it's still good, and it's more fair because honestly the others weren't interrupting with scripts, so it's more equivalent. But we can talk about this more later. I just in terms of Astro specifically, but yeah, it was playing around with this demo that I realized something kind of weird and kind of interesting. And as I said, I deployed the Netlify Edge demo with Astro. I think one of the cool things is it's the whole it's 0 kilobytes on that main page, but that comment page with the compression is only 4.7 kilobytes of JavaScript. I actually found a couple places where Solid's hydration template reduction could actually make the code smaller. So I was able to shave another 200 bytes gzipped off the final bundle. And that is almost the smallest Hacker News I've ever seen. It's the smallest that we've ever seen on stream, but I actually have another Hacker News demo that's even smaller. But maybe we'll get to that later.
And this is due to partial hydration and arguably progressive hydration.
This is due to partial. But I brought this up because this is the perfect segue into our topic today, right? So I'm just going to throw up some kind of banner for a second because I can, and just so I can mark it. And we're going to start hydration. We're going to start talking about hydration here.
Chat, just so you know, I came prepared. I have a Moleskine page filled with questions on hydration that I hope to pick Ryan's brain at. Everyone else in chat probably already understands hydration, but I know that more people watch this video than those in chat. So I'll be chat. You can help me understand hydration too.
Yeah. Now, I've been trying to think of the best ways to approach this because it is a little bit tricky to talk about the subject, and it takes all the basis of everything we talked about so far.
Can we actually start before we do the example? Can you ask the question that everyone asked, which is, what is hydration?
Sure. Yeah. And for me, it always helps actually even just looking at the page anyway.
Yeah.
Like in general, high level, the only expectation. I mean, if you go on Wikipedia, and I can pull this up here, I actually hate the definition on Wikipedia. It's funny because when Mishko was writing his article on hydration, he used the Wikipedia definition. I'm like, this is the worst definition. It actually defeats the point like you're trying to make with your article.
The last thing on that page was hydration web development, but yeah.
I was going to hydration web development. In web development, hydration or rehydration is a technique in which client-side JavaScript converts static HTML web page delivered either through static hosting or server rendering into a dynamic web page by attaching event listeners to HTML elements. I think that is a poor definition.
Yeah, let's dive into that.
Because the problem is, yes, you attach event handlers, but I mean, it hasn't been realistically attaching event handlers for like a decade. In our really early days of the web, we would have used a server-based technology to render and draw a page, and stuff. Like I'm thinking multi-page app. Our background in multi and single-page app is actually really important from last time to understand this. But something like Wikipedia, which I'm pretty sure is a multi-page app, your anchors would list around like how much on here actually requires that much interaction. I mean, these are all links.
We should probably level set as well. Like, what's the starting state, and why can't event handlers be attached when it comes over the wire initially from the server?
I mean, just before we get into that, and they're talking about frameworks that use hydration and all this. What I want to say is the events are important because that's how we interact with our page, but an application is more than just a bunch of disparate events across the page. Like if you have a shopping cart is a classic example, and you click add to cart or like somewhere down here, the cart reflects it up there. How do they communicate between each other, right? Like even if you just attach that one event handler, there's more logic. And back in the day, you just server render it, and then you kind of write the second app on top of your app, where you kind of like you write, you'd be like, okay, on this button, click, maybe do something imperative like update the DOM over here,
Right.
but you need state too, because if you wanted to do something like see do something with that item count, maybe you'd also have to like store it in a location in JavaScript so you could read from it. And that was fine, and it required very little JavaScript, but unfortunately, like, it didn't scale. At a certain point, you're just like, no, like, let me actually write a single app, perhaps, right? And that's part of what made single page apps so popular.
So
Right.
yeah, it's like an app is made up of a couple parts. You have the literal elements, the view. You have the jQuery code right there. So yeah, you have your view, your HTML. You have the event handlers, which are basically the points at which the view is waiting for you to interact with it. And then you have what those event handlers actually do, which usually involves state, this like client side data that allows,
right. But yeah, I mean, knowing what we know about frameworks, we can say all that stuff, which is why obviously this definition is terribly limited, because while I guess the funny thing is, I don't know if hydration was used a ton as a term back when it was the jQuery days, because that was just what jQuery did. The whole idea of hydration or rehydration, where it usually started from, was the suggestion that, well, not just that, but that like it was rehydrate. It was like some work that was already done on the server.
Gotcha.
That like, and I feel like that really came into its own when it was the JavaScript responsible for rendering on the server, because otherwise, like, jQuery on a Rails page or whatever, a PHP page, is like, it wasn't rehydration. That was just jQuery. Like, that's what it did. No, like, you didn't need a term for that.
Can you pull Michael's comment? So this is what you said, right? To get the server rendered app into the same state that I guess same state as if it had been client rendered. Another way of saying that is like what you said, which is get it into the state that it was on the server, sort of. Like, I know the server doesn't really like fully render it maybe, but like the idea is that the server does a bunch of work to get the view, and then it just ships the view. And then the client's like, okay, I have the view, but like, how do I make it an app?
Right. And the thing is, the more complicated, the thing is, declarative is kind of an inversion of control, in a sense, where instead of writing imperative code, you're like, no, describe it and let the other thing handle it. And once you get into this line declarative, which is really nice for writing things that synchronize, because then you don't have to worry about the details of that synchronization. You hand that off. Unfortunately, it just means that you kind of abstract away your means to just be able to do this, do that, because it's a system in place now. So it's kind of inevitable that we move away from that. And in terms of actual hydration, I guess we go right here. As Michael said, there's a few things you do. You have to download the JavaScript. You have to find the places in the DOM that are of relevance to attach event handlers. But more than that, you actually have to kind of restore the application state in such a way so that, like, when you perform the next action, like do the thing you want to do, it's actually in the right state, initialize the right way. Because if it's not, like, if something server rendered a certain way, and then you just start with like a base app that doesn't have that information, like you're going to be in a weird, like, what you see is not what you get. You actually have to make sure that, like, your state variables in your components or whatever are all reflecting what you're seeing on the screen. Otherwise, you're going to get crazy glitches.
And doing that, and I want to like go full circle here. So doing this stuff, right? Downloading JavaScript, finding the nodes, even attaching the nodes, all of this takes work. This work has two main problems. One is that it takes time and bandwidth from the connection, and the other is that it actually takes CPU time to like go and attach all the nodes, right?
Honestly, there's even more than that, because there's execution time. Yes, sir. I guess you're right. There's execution time.
Well, there's a third. Sorry, memory, which is holding all of this stuff, like all the DOM nodes, all of that takes memory too.
Yeah, I mean, but the framework itself, when it's an operational state, is going to take memory. I'm mostly worried about the fact that we have to execute things before we can interact with them,
right?
And that we send everything across the wire twice.
Right. So let's elaborate on that point. Sending everything over the wire twice. We're sending the view, the final quote unquote state, and so like, what are we sending? Yeah, here. Okay, let's talk about this.
Well, it's because generally speaking, we send three forms of things, and that is we send what I call the template or the component code, or like the thing we need to be able to render the template. And this is because things update in the client, we need code to be able to update it, right?
So it's this. I feel like this is out of order. Like the first thing that you think of is the final HTML.
Right. Yeah.
So like the server does a bunch of stuff and is like, okay, this is what the HTML looks like after the React code is run, and then it sends the HTML. But it's not enough to just send the HTML. You have to send all of the components that generated each piece of the HTML in relationship to each other, because you never know when the HTML needs to change. You need to remember how the HTML came about.
Right. And then the other thing you need is like, what if you loaded some data on the server and that's reflected in that HTML? Like you loaded a list of tweets or of stories, and you can interact with them. Like if you don't have that data in the client, the state can't reinitialize. Like if you tried to click on one of them, it wouldn't know what entry in the database it's supposed to update when you click upvote. So you actually need to send the data not just so that you can actually restore that state. So what ends up happening, and I mean, we've shown this before. I'm going to use, just so that you guys don't think I'm like picking on other frameworks, I'm going to use Solid as an example here. But essentially, you'll see this list of stories here, and this list of stories, if I we've done this on stream before, but this list of stories is going to be reflected here. Like we're going to see, what do we got? In here, we've got like the name of this, and in our anchor, you can now ask Google, like you see the title, you can see all the information about the story serialized into the HTML, which makes sense. This is the final view. But if I go down to the bottom here, we're also going to see script tags with all the data serialized again. And this happens in all declarative frameworks that have to do this restoration. So essentially, we've sent the data twice. We've also sent the component code twice, in a sense, because we have to be able to display this HTML so we can like have it here, but we also have it in the components. Like if I could find it and look through, you'll actually see components with the code to generate this.
So one thing I want to go back to is your Wikipedia example, because this is architecturally dependent, I think. So let's say, so you said about Wikipedia, like, hey, this doesn't need a lot of like interactivity, a lot of hydration. But if you built this using Solid, like the same example as the Hacker News example, it would be sending everything twice, right? Even though it doesn't need it.
And the reason for that is because when I navigate to this next page here, I'm going to the server for the data, but I'm rendering this in the client. So I need the code to be able to render these new news items again. So I need it to be in the browser. I need the JavaScript or the template version of it, and I need the finalized HTML. And that's the whole thing here. If you do client-side rendering, you don't send the realized HTML. So you just send the template and the data. So you only send it once. And if you have something that's 100% static, you just send the realized view and you don't send the template or the data. So
yeah, is this so this basic version of hydration, because we're about to talk about like 12 different versions of hydration, but this version where you're like sending things twice, you serialize the data and you send the HTML and you make sure that the way the HTML was made, like the components, the templates are set across. Can we call this like the Next.js approach?
Yeah. It's basically every single page app framework: Svelte, Remix, Next.
I want to bring this up because, when I came to the Solid community, I thought Next.js was not single page app. I thought it was a different thing called SSR. And your point to me was that no, actually, it's just a different way of doing a single page app. Why? Because all the stuff you do in a single page app, right? The sending the templates to have the browser render your app is still done in a framework like Next.js, but this something is added on top of that, which is the HTML is rendered beforehand. The initial HTML is rendered beforehand.
And this is the whole thing when we were talking about routing last time, because you have a single entry point for every page. You can make, even if you static generate 10 pages, when your code starts, you have a single entry point. And this kind of takes us to where I was going here, because like this is my very poor attempt at drawing Twitter. But what you can see here is that Twitter is a single page app. Is that there's a lot of sections and stuff on your page, and when people talk about hydration, we kind of go into this. But this is the visual tree you see, but behind it, if you're writing code, and I only started writing this, and so I apologize that this is not perfect yet. But there is a single root of your app, and under that root, there might be this, say, side nav, and that side nav might have some buttons on it, and the tweet buttons, and maybe the Twitter icon or whatever, and essentially, like I can draw a few more of these to, for fun, under the nav side here, but essentially these are fairly fixed on the nav side. But the other thing that you're going to have is you're going to have a router pretty high up here, because although this doesn't change, this whole section swaps out. I'm on a profile page, but if I went on the feeds page, it's gonna swap out, right? Basically, this whole section, I'm gonna just write that in a little, maybe a dark green. I'm gonna highlight that this whole section here swaps out. And we talked about this before in one of my other streams on nested routing. This is your first level of your routing, and then maybe there's another layer of routing, like a nested routing layer. And I'm going to make this one a little lighter green, and it's right here on this page. Actually, I'm not going to make it lighter green because that green is hard. You can't tell the difference. I'm going to make it like orange. And there's some more nav buttons here, but just to kind of fill out our tree a bit, when we get to our router, we're going to choose a page, and maybe that page is our profile page. Let's say, let's just call it our profile page. And profile, always one character short, right? And under our profile page, we're going to have like what do we call it?
Subcomponents.
We're going to have something like, it's almost mirroring the same nav thing again, but we're going to have like I don't know what to call it, like info top section. So I mean, if you've written apps, you know how this is, like, let's say info section, and then there's also going to be like another router essentially to handle this. And the info section here might have more things in it, like the, what do you call it, like the hero image. And it might have things like bio, and it might have a thing like a tab, the tabs, okay, and I can draw a few more arrows here to kind of link these up, okay, I don't have to get into too much more detail on the page. I think everyone's kind of built things like this, and I want to add one more thing to show the nested routing a little bit on the other side. But essentially, you can see that this is a tree, right? And on under the router, we're gonna choose another route. We're gonna choose, this one's gonna be, because there's a couple routes, but the first one is your, like, my feed essentially, right? There's also like tweets and mentions or whatever, but I'm just to say we're on the feed page, like
pulling up Twitter to match this up.
Yeah, and I'm not going to worry about what's in that feed for now. But
yeah, you have the ability to, like, also it's kind of interesting when you do it on Twitter. you get the loading spinner.
Yeah. Yeah, Twitter is a single page app. But what I wanted to show you is that some of these things are fixed, like the nav, like they don't really change that much. But then there's things like the router, which swap. And so there's a profile here, but there's also like I'm gonna call it, I said that was my feed. I'm gonna make something that's just feed, which is like the main feed page, right?
And there's also one for everyone else's profile.
Right. But I'm gonna do this for a second. I'm gonna put a dotted line here. And yeah, I mean, where else can we go on Twitter? Obviously.
Well, I'm saying like your one.
Yeah, so there's home, which is what I just called the feed, but there's home, and then there's I'm not in very many communities, but there's home, and what's this? Is this messages? Okay, I mean, I'm in the wrong bar view. If I zoom out, it's probably like a bit. It's what I'm actually drawing.
Right.
Yeah, but messages here, sure. So let's just go back to my Twitter drawing and go. There's home, and then let's add another one here. And call it messages. What I'm trying to get at here is there is this tree of what you see and what you don't see, essentially, right? And like there's the tree that's present, and even these other trees that aren't present. And when we talk a lot about things like code splitting in single page apps, it's being able to just split off these trees. So there's other things that are under my route too, other arrows. We haven't drawn them on, but there's other ones dotted over here.
So the idea behind code splitting here is connected to the idea of lazy loading, right?
Yeah, and the idea is if you had to load the whole app at once, it would be freaking huge for every single page. So what a single page app does is it does this kind of code splitting, lazy loading to kind of split it off. But the reason I want to just show this tree is there is an active tree when you first render the page, and then there's all the other potential trees. So we don't have to worry about those other trees right now, but I think it's important to recognize that they exist and that there's a decision point. Because the thing is, if you are client-side rendering, router's a great one. There's other decision points. If you switch from profile to home, you need all the code at that point to render home. And if you switch back to profile, you need all the code to render profile.
Well, hang on. You just rendered profile before.
No, but it's there. Right, but new data.
Okay.
Right.
Well, then, can't it be smart and just replace the data?
Well, I'm not with a realized... like you need the template to do it, because with the realized HTML, you can't take HTML. I mean, you can try, but it's not. You can't take HTML and get back to the template.
Well, I guess what I'm imagining, like in Solid, is that when I go back to profile, we need new data, so we like run the resource again, and the resource just updates all the things that depend on it. That's sort of what I was thinking in my head.
Right, but you need to know. I mean, where's that HTML coming from? Like,
I was thinking we had it. It was in the background somewhere because it was the initial active page.
Right, but even then, like, look at the generated HTML.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do I know that what this 120 is?
Right. We know. Right. So I was imagining in my head this like solid app state, but like we don't have that anymore.
No.
So the whole dependency tree of state is lost.
Yeah, and it's not just that. It's not to the state dependency tree. It's also like how that corresponds with the view. You like where is this a template, or is like how do you know where the split is of the templates?
Right.
Like how do you know what a template is here?
Right.
There are some indicators for some things. Because you can see this is from Hydration. Hydration actually makes good use of the HTML.
We were talking about like pre-hydration, right?
Right, but but see Hydration, I actually have markers here. You can actually see the templates being wrapped by hashtag open / close. Like there are actual markers in the HTML for Hydration. But what I'm getting at is even with that, it's hard to like extract backwards. Like you need to know that like this one is tied to a specific data field. That's not encoded here.
Yeah.
So yeah, and we're using Solid, but literally every framework, like single page app framework, works like that, and that's just the nature of it. So what I'm getting at is, if there is a decision point in the tree, we need all the code below it, right? This is kind of the starting point of where the whole hydration conversation starts, because if your mindset coming in is a single page app, unfortunately, because of the nature of this, if you know the client's going to be rendering something, that means that code needs to get there eventually. And short of building like a bunch of different bundles for the same page and have to figuring out how to dedupe the code or split it up granularly enough that you only load the pieces you need, generally the easy solution for this is ship all the code, or at best all the code below the first decision point. This nav can be static for the most part, in theory. Most of the time, though, you ship that too, because you have a fancy client-side router that has special link tags and handles the stuff on the client, right? Like if you take a remix page or SvelteKit or whatever, and if you remove all the JavaScript, yes, it's progressive enhanceable, but that's because you click an anchor and it redoes the whole page. And the thing is, even most frameworks, even React Router or Remix stuff, even if you only focus your JavaScript over here, these navs still want the JavaScript to get the client-side routing the way they work. So you actually need React to actually get all the way up to the root if you want to do it. SvelteKit is different, and Solid is actually different. We actually use event delegation in our router, so it's possible to actually capture events and actually have client-side routing without actually having these be hydrated. But generally speaking, we're still a little bit trapped by that first decision point, because when you switch between these, you need all the JavaScript code below it.
Okay, so in summary, let's see if I can make what you just said as short as possible. Even though the initial screen might be simple, you're going to run into this problem of you have to ship the code to render all the other parts of the tree. When do you ship that? And it's going to be a lot of it. Do you do that initially? Do you do that when you click on it? How does this? It's a lot of code.
Right. Well, that's the problem. Hydration, and we see in my benchmarking, can take seconds on slow devices and slow networks. So do you want to wait? You can do it up front, or you can wait till the person clicks on it or scrolls into view or something. Do you want to wait for something that's going to picture it take you have the whole app and you need to download and load the whole app, and it actually takes time. Do you wait till someone clicks on it? Do you do something where you just put a global click handler on the root, and then, okay, anywhere time you click anything, we're going to delegate it to load everything? No, you don't do that, because that'd be worse than taking the hit up front, because you'd just be deferring it to when they actually interact with the page. So you don't get to kind of do unless you do something smarter here, you don't get to kind of progressively load in a coarse grain chunk way. We just take the whole thing. It doesn't make sense, because it's way too expensive when the work you're going to be doing is the whole page. I don't know if that makes any sense. It's just you don't want to defer loading the whole page. It's way too much work.
Right. And so, we're not really talking about SSR versus no matter what, we have this problem. You have a normal create React app, you have this problem.
Well, no, you don't. This is an SSR specific problem. I know, because
it sounds like any client app that has.
But here's the thing, and we talked about this a bit on last stream. In a client rendered app, it sends that blank page immediately. There's no delay. So yes, the client takes it, but I showed you before, solid client rendering can outscore some SSR frameworks in Lighthouse, because it gets the page there immediately because it doesn't have to wait to load any of the data. And then it does all the data fetching, and then it renders it. But the reason is it doesn't send everything twice. It sends a blank HTML page, and it like literally sends nothing.
Doesn't
So
it still
it
take a
sends
lot?
It sends a template.
Doesn't it still take a lot of code to render each?
Oh, it takes a lot of, yes, it takes a lot of code. So yes, there is an issue there, and it delays the API requests, which on a slow network are bad. But what I'm saying is, like, it's actually SSR has actually made this worse. Is a better way of putting it, because now you're waiting for the data, and you
wait for the data on the server, right?
And then and if you don't respond right away because you're waiting for it, because you're waiting to send the headers and stuff, then once it's done getting all the data, then it goes fetches the JavaScript, and then
right. So in the server side, it goes like this: the server fetches the data. It then sends the HTML with the data to the client. The client still needs to fetch the JavaScript on top of that, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, I wish I had our diagram from yesterday or last week, because this is exactly what we're talking about again. So, and then it's a huge chunk that all executes, and while that's happening, well, you have the benefit that the page is visual,
right?
But you can't interact with it while you're waiting now for that big chunk to download and run. And what we were just talking about is, what if you waited to hydrate it until someone clicked on something? Now you're just waiting even longer and taking the hit later. So just deferring hydration is not an option. And, there's an argument here that if your page works without the JavaScript, like a progressive enhanceable page, that like it's fine, you don't have to worry about it. But like, let's face it, when you interact with a page without the JavaScript, it behaves differently. Like, you reload pages, it's not the same.
This route example is a great example. Like, if you don't have JavaScript, your home is going to go back to the server.
Right. And another thing is, while it's doing this, it's still chugging along, and like, I see this all the time with hydration. So it's hydration is, you like start typing, and then like the page glitches almost, like, because it's blocking. If you've seen our Lighthouse scores, while it's hydrating, generally speaking, it's blocking. So it actually affects the user interaction. So again, progressive enhancement is not enough. You can't just be like, well, I got progressive enhancement. Who cares about hydration? That's not.
Right. You can't argue that your page works even without the JavaScript, because first of all, it doesn't work that well. And second of all, you want it to work better eventually with the JavaScript. And that process of going from raw HTML with links to JavaScript is going to feel like you're going to feel it as a user, that process.
Right. So yeah, it's good to have. If something goes wrong, you're on a really slow device that can't handle JavaScript, like, these are good things to have, but it's not a replacement, right? And it's not even like a mitigation technique either for people who actually have JavaScript or have that expectation. It's not. It's just checking the boxes to make sure that your site is accessible to people, and that that's what this is about.
So there's this interesting question in the background here, which is like, if hydration is such an annoying problem, like, can I just do client-side rendered apps most of the time and be fine?
I mean, I've shown this before a little bit. There's a simple answer for this. You just go over to, you pick a page with 255 comments. It doesn't even have to be that expensive. We'll just give it a good slow 3G. And for us in first world, scenarios, maybe we're fine. Okay, there we go. So that wasn't too bad. The page only took 6 seconds, and maybe that's fine, because this page is there's nothing to it. But what I'm trying to say is, so this is server rendering. Let's see what happens when we do our same test on.
That was server rendering. Let's do the client side rendering. Yeah.
Let's see. Wait for it.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Let's run this again.
Okay. All right, so we start with.
There we go.
Okay.
Did I wait long enough? Yeah, okay. I think we're fine. I mean, there's some other stuff here because I've got extensions. My point is okay. So it's like 8 seconds. So usually what I see is on slow networks, we're talking double the time. I mean, literally double the time. This is not a terribly expensive page. I
Double
mean, like,
time until what?
till I mean, this is the largest contentful paint because you don't have to worry about hydration on the client render. So largest contentful paint and hydration are like equivalent because by the time it does the largest contentful paint, then it's interactive at that point. So yeah, it's literally double the time from hydration to thing. First of all, you see it way sooner actually in the server rendered version, but it's usually a little double.
If you compare the actual interactive points,
Yeah.
the server side rendered is so much faster. Why?
Well, I mean, it's because it gets to start everything sooner.
It's like the data, right? That's kind of what I'm
because
getting
the data fetching. Because I'm doing the data fetching.
Because it's not the actual app code, because you told me that was sent twice. But what you actually get to save on is calling the API, right?
Exactly, because you started the API the second the server got the request. Here you have to wait for, again, I should have this like the other drawing on speed dial.
Yeah, I can like send it back to you because it's on my screen.
Yeah, because Excalibur only lets me have one open at a time.
Oh, that's why. Here's your here's the PNG version on Discord.
All right, let's see if I can remove that. Okay. Right. What I'm saying is, if you are sorry, where was I? Yeah, sorry. It's this time here that we're talking about where you're processing the requests and versus like this time here. Basically, on a server rendered, you're doing all the work here, and maybe this pushes that down. But on a client rendered, this happens quicker, but you still have to go get the JS and have it come again. And this is where the data loads.
So this is really important because like
base here, you start instead of starting the database here, you start the database down here on a client.
And like this is like in your list of like the 3 things that hydration has to like repeat. What wasn't on that list was talking to the API, and that's really important.
Yeah, you have to do like 2 handshakes before you can get started. Like this is why like the more static-y type approaches like don't scale this way as well when they rely too much on client rendering, and why Remix was doing that next comparison and was kind of blowing it out of the water, because the next example was waiting for here, and Remix is like, just do it here. Like it's not hard to see like why Remix is way faster in that scenario. Like, but generally speaking,
now if you're building a game, you're not fetching any data, so you might as well be a client side rendered,
Right. So I mean, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I just wanted to. It is important for us to at least understand the importance here of like server rendering is still beneficial. There's just like this gap, this weird thing, what we do hydration. So this is kind of the baseline we're dealing with today. And the question is, how do we get back to the old jQuery days, essentially, is where the goal comes in. And we've looked at this and attacking this in multiple different ways over the years. And I was trying to think of how to best approach this topic, because there's actually 2 ways I could look at it. One way would be to look at it historically in terms of events. But the other way is to look at it, kind of like my tables in terms of how like mechanically, like categorically look at how I characterize solutions, because I use a lot of words, at least they're not 3-letter acronyms, but I use a lot of words to describe characteristics or approaches to hydration.
I kind of want to go to your hydration article, which was basically like a list of different approaches of solving this problem.
Yeah.
And we can sort of knock out each one. And I want to like the bad hydration, where you're like rerunning everything. Can we call that like replaying?
I don't want to do that because it's not a single one of the axes. It's actually 3 of the axes. If I call it replaying, it sounds like replaying is one of my axes
Oh,
essentially.
we didn't get to. Okay, I don't want to get to the axes yet. Okay, gotcha. We'll just call it Next.js.
Yeah, I don't talk about that because it's not actually. It's just like full. Like it's just full. It's full hydration. Like it's actually a combination of a number of things, but is the full.
We're rerunning your app on the client. That's full hydration.
Right? Yeah. So the first thing you can do is, what if we just don't rerun your app at all? Yeah. And some frameworks boast their static routes, which is like remove the script tag.
Right.
And now
this is like by saying like the quickest way to get back to the olden days where we like render some PHP on the server and send it and like a little bit of JavaScript. So the best way to get to that is just remove all the JavaScript, right? Yeah. We did it. You know, like
yeah, we're back to that progressive enhancement story. No one actually wants to do this, but there are a few pages where that makes sense. Like our Hacker News page, we don't actually need any JavaScript on that front page because it's just links and stuff. But there is a difference because, you know, obviously Hacker News doesn't matter, but any page that you choose to opt out of all the JavaScript for, sorry, get out of this CSR mode. Any page, the thing is, if there's no JavaScript here, and then you click this link, you're not doing client-side routing. You don't get to actually, you don't get to actually get into the client mode until you load that JavaScript.
By the way, would you say that approaches that basically say literally used? I mean, actually, I'll use a better example. X-Element, someone in the Astro community, shout out to Fuzzy, has this tool that basically says, cut out all your framework code and basically write modern jQuery to like sprinkle in bits. Would you call that this approach too?
Maintaining 2 apps.
It's maintaining 2 apps, but your second app is so simple. It's just like a few pieces of jQuery.
Right, exactly. I don't have a name for that. Some people call it sprinkles of JavaScript. Stimulus is on that side.
But it's basically this approach, right? You don't need hydration because your second app is like its own thing.
It's going to do the work for you, right? The thing is when someone builds these static routes, I don't know that's even what they're thinking. A lot of times, they're still not thinking that they're going to do the 2 app approach. Always. And there are exceptions where people do go in, but like the slight difference with X-Element is it's still kind of, that one actually might not even be considered necessarily too much of a second app because it layers in really nicely and it kind of fits into Astro's thing.
It's kind of like an architect. It uses DX to like help you write jQuery easier, you know?
Right. And I've seen a few of those over time. And even Corset, from Matthew Phillips, which is kind of like CSS based, is a similar concept.
Oh, I was looking at that. That was so interesting. Yeah.
But what I'm trying to get here is that works because of the way Astro's set up and a lot of the MPA stuff. Can you picture trying to layer that on your React app?
Right. That's weird because React is a client-side JavaScript framework. So
you get to layer it in that way. So I think,
but Laravel is a better example of this.
Right.
Do this in Laravel.
Right. So mostly what I'm getting at is like, that's kind of like when I keep on talking about like how do we get back there with the declarative frameworks? It's kind of like it's kind of like that zone. It's not something that I'd consider that the declarative frameworks can really do. You don't really mix and match like that.
It's another way of saying
when you see static routes, it's might be like a little vanilla JavaScript at the bottom of your page.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, for the most part, it just means I've opted out into kind of like a static MPA type mode where there's no JavaScript.
Another way of saying is like if you
static routes or MPAs, and I'm like, I guess so, because my definition of a single page app is a single code entry point, and static routes have no code, so they aren't a single code entry point.
Another way of saying this is like if you go this direction, you just gave up on React. You've now just said React is like a nice way of writing PHP. Like you gave up on what it is.
Well, I mean, the funniest thing is there are companies that have gone this way. Netflix actually
like they used React and went this way.
Yeah, because I think they originally had a React app, and then they're like invested heavily on React, and they're like, oh crap, it's not performant enough. So they actually removed it from the client, and then like render React on. I don't know if they still do this, but they released an article explaining how they rendered with React on the server, and then like upgraded it with JavaScript in the client.
So let's just like, if you analyze that approach, you just used React like PHP.
Yeah, and the funniest thing is React.
This is a way to render HTML, and that's it.
We went over this last stream. React is not a fast way to render on the server. In fact, it's like 10 or 20 times slower than using.
But you didn't mention this Netflix thing last time. This is interesting.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're still on that, but they released an article explaining like how they did this really smart approach. But essentially,
it's smart if you just wrote thousands of lines of React code. Yeah.
Right. So, anyways, what I was getting at, static routes is a thing, but usually it doesn't. It's a cool trick, is what I usually call it. I think there are places, like very few places, that it does exist that it's valuable, but in those places you're like, you probably should have used something else. But I mean, it is an option, so it gives good versatility. But I just want to kind of just talk about this one because it's not the thing. I don't really necessarily, you know what? The problem is I want to talk about a couple of the base things before I get into the other thing. We talked about this before. Another thing that people have looked at is trying to reverse the data out of the HTML. The reason I want to talk about these first is because these two routes, of basically static routes and extracting the data, haven't really panned out.
This one doesn't work well with React either, does it?
No, because you need a framework that serializes and knows how to pull stuff out of the DOM. So you need a custom framework to do it. There's the guy who created this, Ben, he's working on a new framework that I think does this even better. And he's come up with ways to serialize additional data into the DOM where it needs to, which isn't unlike something like Quick to a certain degree. But essentially, this is not something you can easily do. You might be thinking, oh, I can just extract data out of the DOM, but sometimes the data you see in the DOM is derived, and you need the sources of that derivation in order to reverse engineer your state.
So let's just give the derived data example from your article. You have a date in a specific format.
Yeah.
How do you extract the original data from that? You know, like it might it might say like August 12th and not say the year, but like the original code had the year in it, and you might need that in a different view of your app.
Exactly. So I just wanted to bring these up because they're interesting, but and things people first think about, but they honestly aren't where we're making a ton of progress.
And we can say explicitly, they aren't where we're looking at because they don't make use of your client side framework like React or Solid. They're totally different approaches that require
you need something different. The only thing that I regret from this article is I talk about stuff. I talk about 6 different approaches in this article, I think. But the truth of the matter is, the 2 approaches are built on top of each other. I mentioned something I call lazy loading, which is progressive hydration. And then later on here, I mentioned something that I call out of order hydration, which is an extension of lazy loading. And then here I mentioned something called islands or partial hydration.
Yeah. And I can't we should probably just talk about when we get there, progressive and partial hydration.
Well,
they just overlap, and I'm so confused.
That's what we're going to talk about it. And server components, which is I place as an extension of partial hydration. And the thing is, what I'm getting at is these are ideas that build off each other. And the reason is because there's 3 characteristics that matter when looking at these hydration solutions. That's the thing. I've looked at lots of different techniques, and as I mentioned before, I tried to kind of fill in the table, so to speak. I don't know if you've
yeah, it was a tweet, right?
You're right, but there originally was this table, right?
Yeah, this table gives me a migraine.
This is the original version of the table. I'm going to do one here from Adia's Money, and this table wasn't terrible, but the problem is it tried to it talks about first byte, it talks about time to interactive, it talks about first contentful paint, and it puts it all in the same table and defines these rendering techniques and shows like an example, like this is Gmail, this is Netflix, this is and it's not a bad idea.
I feel like it's involving the routing story too.
Right, and people go, well, except for this, and like there's the comment here, limited streaming and CSR with pre-rendering. Is that true? SSR with rehydration, like it gets really hard to know what these are talking about because it assumes a lot about this. And what ended up happening was Addy came back and he made a bigger table and added a few more things. But this is
more things in our table. This will help.
Well, I mean, the problem is it is complicated. This is why we did the last session, because we tried to break apart this thing. See, SSR with hydration and then streaming. Can't streaming have hydration? Like, how does it? And what we did last time was we removed hydration from the table and then made.
And by the way, we got 2 or 3 tables, out of that conversation without ever involving hydration. And like, this is a table that's trying to combine everything.
Right. And where we got was an intersection between routing paradigm and with rendering, right?
Yeah.
So we didn't talk about it. But what I've been trying to get at is, and maybe I'll just draw this somewhere over here, is what's the trick here? If I move this up, yeah, I can move it up. There's 3 axes here. Can I make a double arrowed line? Can I go like
advanced Excel draw here? I don't really know.
Yeah, it's like, can I make an arrow that's an arrow on both sides? Yeah, that's how you do it. And then we'll choose an exciting color that reflects our attitude right now.
Oh, that's exactly my attitude. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, and maybe we'll make it a little bit thicker. Okay. And maybe we'll give each of these its own custom color. Okay. So we'll have a purple one. We'll have a green one. And we'll have a whatever is cyanish color.
Okay, this is fine. We're good.
And then what I'm going to put to you is that there's 3 ends of the things. And this I'm going to do in black. Okay. So eager. Progressive.
By progressive, is that a synonym for lazy, or is it different?
It could be lazy, if that helps. But
well, no, I just want to because people use different terms to describe the same
lazy thing. Yeah, it's because lazy loading and progressive hydration are different things, which is partially.
All right, cool. We're going to talk about that.
Sorry, what am I listening to? I mean,
full and partial. Yeah.
Full and partial. And then my last one here is replayable and resumable. And you've seen these words probably float around a bit recently. But essentially what I view this is these things are not like a stepping stone. Like, it's not like you take partial, then you make it progressive, and then you make it resumable. It is not a 1, 2, 3 kind of thing. These are 3 separate things. And I've made some tables on Twitter. There was recently a table here about hydration strategies. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is because it shows it like a 1, 2, 3 thing. And I want to kind of debunk that because I think the definitions of these things are actually important. And I'm going to show what these definitions are, and then I'm going to give you what my definitions are. What this says is standard is everything hydrates at once, okay? Which is what we've been talking about this whole time, this whole top-down, tree, full hydration, standard hydration. And then the partial is like, well, some parts of the page don't hydrate at all. Great.
Would that be like the nav in the Twitter example?
Yeah, but I mean, you can do if you can do better than that, if you know the page is going to render on the server. A lot of the techniques we're going to talk about right now, once you get out of it's very, very difficult, but not impossible. But we're going to leave single page apps behind for a bit because it's not impossible for single page apps to employ some of these techniques, but it's very, very difficult, and almost no single app framework today can support almost any of the techniques I'm going to talk about. So like we're gonna put that aside for a moment, and I'll explain.
And the difference that we care about here between single page apps and multi-page apps, and this might sound obvious, is that when you do your routing, the server handles the routing in the multi-page app setup. Like that's really
it actually does the rendering of the new content.
Yeah.
So in this thing, they're showing partial, and then they show progressive is taking that same partial thing. See how it's missing this, and loading a bit first and then a bit later. And then they show resumable as doing these kind of different zones in as needed with dot.
I don't really know what he's trying to do with the color dotted lines versus the solid colored lines, but in all of these examples, you have some HTML fully loaded at the get-go.
Well, you have all the HTML fully loaded.
You have all the HTML fully loaded. So even though in this bottom example, it looks like it's all dotted, it's just not hydrated yet, but it's fully visual. It's like the Hacker News example with all the comments are already there at the beginning.
And that's why this is a difficult thing to look at, because I'm going to try to kind of display a different definition for these. And some of it is partially due to historical reasons, and it's convenient for me to think of things this way. And I'm actually just gonna, because I actually wrote them down on a table that I shared on stream a few weeks ago. Ignore the table, just read the definitions.
Right, so we have
progressive is to load JavaScript and hydrate on an event or interaction.
So the routing example was kind of like where I was like, hey, like when you click on home, that's when you load all the JavaScript to do home.
Right. But the thing is, it's not on navigation. We're talking about hydration here, like initial load. So it's more of like perfect example is on this comment page. This is mostly static. It's the idea that when you click on this at that point, that's when you load the JavaScript to do this action.
So there's basically what this does is it takes that idea of code splitting, and it says code split so much that you can load just the bit of code from the server to run the thing that has to happen when an interaction occurs.
Right. The tricky part about that is it's not exactly necessarily simple to do, because components talk to each other. They have props, there's context and whatnot. So generally speaking, this is where the MPAs come in, because and these all play together, but generally speaking, the most basic cases, you could say that when this clicks, load all the JavaScript for the whole page. You could say that.
That's nuts.
You could register a handler at the top and say on any click, load the JavaScript for the page. But usually what we do is make smaller pieces. I just want to explain that progressiveness isn't about the size of the pieces. It's about the fact that it loads progressively. And that could be a click. It could be scrolling.
So your point of saying that it could load all the JavaScript. So in that example where code splitting sucked, but you just waited a while before, like you waited until interaction to load all you're saying that is progressive because it waited.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. I mean, there's some people would say that if it's just a single chunk that it's not progressive, but you are loading it as needed. Maybe it's at idle time. Maybe it's on scroll or something. Like maybe it's a single bundle. It doesn't matter. But I'm saying the progressive.
Actually, I like Gray Restful's example of loading the code for interacting with a fancy text editor.
Right, but it depends. Often those cases, I mean, it depends. If it's hydrating it, then it would fall into this. But often those cases are what I call lazy loading, because you like show a fake image and then you actually like render those.
Okay. That's different. Lazy loading is when like you don't really have anything at all. But hydrating is when you have all these like HTML elements that you need if your text area was fully interactive. And with this hydration strategy, you are progressively loading the events.
And those events, as I said, they don't have to be a click. They could be a scroll, like an intersection observer or whatever.
Right,
Usually, we do it more granularly because the JavaScript is too expensive to run. We just went over why it's way too expensive. But like talking about this,
eager versus progressive is all about waiting.
Yes, it's all about
when do you do it.
So is it all at once at this extreme, or are we loading it as needed? And usually that involves code splitting. I'm saying that as needed from the most coarse grain thing. And I'm talking about granularity because it's going to come up here. It makes a difference a bit. Is from the most coarse grain perspective, it's just waiting to load everything till you need it.
Yeah, like that's why I don't think you should have said like did you really mean all at once, or what you meant was at the beginning. Like you said eager is all at once, but that's not eager, that's full.
Yeah. Sorry. I at the beginning, eager is that it's eager. It doesn't wait for an event or interaction.
Okay, so yeah, that's actually a really interesting point. So
yes,
it's useful for us to like think of these axes as different, even though in practice you're probably going to mix them. Like this was great. So like the example of progressive, like, yeah, it would be progressive if you loaded all the JavaScript way later, but like in practice, you probably want to combine progressive with something like partial, which we'll get to.
Right, exactly. And yeah, so yes, and this is why I have an issue here, because this sounds like this is a progression. It's not. These actually can happen together, and they are independent. I'm going to get here for a second. Then I partial. And this one's the weirdest one for people because partial is like, oh, it means not all the JavaScript, but there's implications of it. Partial is not as simple as saying all or some of the JavaScript. It's will it ever need all or some of the JavaScript? Partial uses the knowledge of server versus client to only ship code and serialize data that's needed in the browser. So what I mean by that is, remember how on a static page, we didn't need to send any of the data because we knew we didn't have to do the double data thing because we knew we'd never need it. It's not enough to just load some of the JavaScript as you need it to be partial, because you could potentially load that JavaScript, which means you don't know that you don't need to serialize that data, which means, and tree shake the library, let's say. You don't know, you know how frameworks are tree shakeable? Mm-hmm. Like you can use some features, like Svelte and Solid use this a lot, that they only ship the features to the browser that you use in the framework because the compiler kind of helps that along. I'm going to quit this now. What I'm trying to get at is, you don't get to do that if you don't know what's on the server or what's on the client. So partial is the absolute knowledge of what
is gonna. Okay, so let me try to repeat it back to you and see if I understand this. So let's talk about the axis of partial. I think now my Discord is freaking out at me, so let me quit mine. Let's say we're eager, so we're loading everything up front. So not everything up front, we're loading up front. If I have eager and I'm not partial, I'm loading all the JavaScript I was running on the server, I'm loading it all on the client.
Yeah.
But if I'm eager and partial, I'm smart about it. I think to myself, like there were parts of the library, maybe, I don't know what's a good example. Suspense is probably a bad example, but
well, I mean, even go back to a page. I mean, Marco came up with partial hydration as early as 2015, Marco 2. So I can always kind of show this. It's like, this is showing a whole page hydrating. Marco's like, look, we know on the selling page, the only things that are interactive are the cart button and the add to cart. So partial is like kind of going, look, you can't do anything with these pages.
Yeah.
We're only going to send the JavaScript for this. And we know that 100% from the authoring experience. Astro is another example of partial. in that that you say this is an island. The stuff outside the island never needs to.
I like that they call it code elimination, because code elimination fits with how you, like, let's say we're doing this in Solid. So like you write your app. It's different than in Astro, because there you as the user know. But like, let's say you write your React app. The idea of partial is that like somehow the framework will know that like there's no events here, something like that.
Right. Yeah. And as I said, Astro, React server components, and even Marco 4 and 5 to a degree kind of have ways of knowing this. In Marco, it's like, does your component have state? If your component doesn't have state.
Yeah. I mean, like in this paragraph, its compiler automatically detects which components only need to be rendered on the server. How does it know that? Well, some of your components don't really do much.
Right. They just render stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, from Marco today, that's not too complicated, but it's very similar to stuff like Astro. And it takes us back to our tree for a second here, because like the challenge here is, the thing is, if you're in a multi-page app, and we mentioned that we need these full trees in a client rendered app, because when you go here, you need to be able to render this, and you go here, you need to render this whole thing. But if this is a multi-page app and the routing happens on the server, this decision point isn't a decision point anymore. It's fixed. You go to this page, it's always the profile. In fact, in a multi-page app, this detaches. Like each of these has their own code.
Yeah. So like in an MPA, you don't have this idea of like a agnostic route. The idea is you have one route for home, one route for profile, etc.
Yeah, exactly. So while the nav is going to get rendered there too as a separate thing, it's isolated, because this route and this router components are not present in the MPA. And in a sense, this router isn't as well. So it's basically, I mean, I don't know how, maybe I can show this with
the idea of an MPA is like the server, like there's no such thing as a living router, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's not gonna be enough.
That's kind of, I don't know why I described it that way.
Right. So I'm saying is, in an MPA, suddenly this happens where these routers are taken out of the equation, essentially.
Yeah.
And now you have one app here, one, depending on which page you are. See, these are dots. So one app here, and one app here. Right.
And let's like, you're like, there's an app at my feed, and it looks a lot like the closest one in the tree to it. So even though there's like separate apps, they reuse the same code. They just run it in a different way.
I'm not sure.
All right, never mind. Let's keep going. I'm getting tired.
Okay. All I'm trying to say is that we have new entry points. Instead of these single entry points, we now have new endpoints, and there's no decision points. So we can basically go, oh, this is static. There's no class nav here. So even because this is under, because this is under the server thing, there's no shared thing. This whole island, there's nothing interactive here. I mean, there's a tweet, so maybe that is, but we can basically go, okay, well, nav actually doesn't need to be there, and it's only this tweet where are things. So you pull all the static stuff out, and you just have these top level entries, which we call islands, essentially. So your one page becomes these multiple apps, but you got to use a declarative framework to render them on the server, and they just are set up with tooling so that they split it into multiple apps. And that's basically what Astro and Marco do. And that's what partial is. Because the thing is, in these scenarios where it's partial, if you load the data above the partial thing, the only data you need to serialize is the data that you pass in as props you into your components, because essentially they can never be fetched again, because they were fetched on the server, and there's no stateful interaction that could cause them to fetch, which means that data can never change. So and since the data has to come in, like even if this is fully dynamic and does different stuff with different pieces of the data, you would have had to pass any data it would ever need in through the props, which means that's the only data you need to serialize. So the data that you use to render these other components that are in static trees never needs to be sent to the server. And that's what I'm talking about with serialization. You use the tree to know that you don't need to serialize that data. You don't need to ship those components. And even more, if these used features of the framework that you don't need, to not even to code split the framework and only ship the features being used in the browser. So
let me reiterate just so I make sure I understand. When we say use the tree, you're saying if a component sends some data to a child, then the state matters and you need to send that data to the client. Right?
If it's a stateful child or an island, if it sends data to a component that's never going to get rendered in the browser, then that data just doesn't matter anymore.
Right. So it basically knows when you're using data to shove it in a p tag versus when you're using data to like manipulate.
Yeah, I mean, you sort of like it's the client entry, the islands, the client entry points are separate apps. So you just need the data you need to enter those separate apps. Essentially, you just need because that data can never change. It's static because it's rendered on the server. So it's cool because I said it means for stuff like this Hacker News page. I showed you all the stuff that we serialized here. But if I go into, I don't know what you call it, Astro Hacker News. Let's actually, I'm not going to use Astro. I'm going to use Marco. hn.marco. Use Marco. If I go to this page has no JavaScript, so it's not going to serialize anything. But if I go to a page that has comments, what you're going to see here in the script is almost nothing. Like here's the script. It's just telling Marco where the top level entries are. But if I go into, I don't know, it doesn't matter which one I pick. Let's pick Remix. If I go into that and go to the comments, what you're going to see is they're going to make me go to the network tab and pull it out of the HTML because they delete it after. But what I wanted to show here is they're going to be sending all the data serialized. See action data, state, track boundaries, or actually, can I pretty it? Yeah, where is it? We're going to see all the comments right here. See?
And this is not utilizing partial.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's a single page app framework like Svelte or Next or whatever.
Yeah. So okay. So partial is this really cool technique that partially, like, I like the idea of calling it code elimination, where basically it says but
it's more than code elimination. It uses the knowledge of the server versus client to only ship the code and serialize the data needed in the browser.
Right. So one of the things we were sending in Hydration is the ability to recreate a component. And this knows which components need to be recreated later on. And if if a component is just rendered once, it doesn't send any of that information. All it does is send the final HTML.
Exactly. And right now, talking about these two, almost fast forwards us to like this year, like up from 2015 when Marco first released commercial hydration till 2021 when Quick kind of came on the scene, and like Marco 6. This is all this is all we had going, and we've been talking a lot about components, right? This is where the game kind of changes, because essentially Marco had partial hydration. We see it here.
Was it doing that eagerly, you would say?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So looking back at our Excalibur draw, Marco is eager and partial, right?
Yeah.
And then it's funny, I put React Server components on here too. They're a little bit different, but they use the same laws of multi-roots, like kind of like partial hydration, and they're also eager and partial. basically, if it's white in my diagram, it means that it's the opposite of the side of the spectrum. So these are replayable, eager, and partial, essentially. As in, once you get into the island, wherever it is, you see this profile. Once you're in the profile, I mean, we know for the profile that it's mostly static. So what we're going to do is we're going to get into the info, and there's going to be like, a like button or follow button or something. Once we get into there and we have the dynamic part, everything from that dynamic part down is replayable. So when the app starts up, it's eager. So it loads the JavaScript right away and runs it right away. And it replays just the small pieces, but it's small because it's partial. So eager, partial, replayable was basically every.
And replayable is really important because it allows you to recreate components with the new state, right?
Yeah, replayable just means, you run it from the top down, like we've been talking about so far. We're going to talk about
Resumable. Are we replaying, like when we say replay, are we replaying the execution that happened on the server? Is that what we're saying?
You try and start with the same initial state, and then you run it again, and you don't do any rendering.
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering why we're calling it replayable and not like replaying. Like replayable implies we're going to replay it again later on, right? And is that true?
It's just, I mean, it replays it. That is what the hydration is. When you do the hydration.
So we're not talking about like hydration lets us do more replays in the future. We're saying just the act of hydrating. What is it? It's replaying the execution that was done before.
Exactly. So, and this is because that's how frameworks work. They all replay essentially is the thing. So in our thing here, you see React Server Components and Marco are actually incredibly similar, and we didn't actually see kind of component level or like.
Can I guess? Because like I don't really know a lot about either one. Is the difference between them that you can call your React Server component code again later on?
Yes. Yeah. But because we're only focusing on like hydration right now, that distinction doesn't actually matter.
Okay. That makes sense.
So, So it wasn't actually until Astro that we saw progressive enter the thing and not do it eagerly.
Is the simplest way to do progressive is like have just a little intersection observer be like, when you get to this part of the page in view, hydrate that.
The simplest way is go load this in a request idle callback.
Okay, what's a request idle callback?
That means that once the browser is done doing what it's doing, then do it. That's what we did.
Okay.
That when you go in Astro and go client : idle, that is the trick. That's what we were talking about on the Astro stream with Fred. He was like, I wish that was the default. He's like, it's just like an easy win. And we saw it. It took Astro's benchmark from 66, the Astro Solid benchmark from 66 to 96 because of just deferring and being non-blocking. Obviously, when your page gets larger, that might not be an option. You do want to be eager a bit because you're just deferring the inevitable. But when your stuff is really, really small, and I'm just talking about like the main part. There's always things that you want to defer, but Astro made it really, really easy to do this because they have all those client directives. You can go client load, client visible.
So in other words, Astro said, choose your you choose how you want to wait. Choose the wait until, right? Like
yes, exactly. So, and it's all component level, and that's essentially the thing. That's kind of the state of where we've been to date. And you can do this with existing frameworks as long as they're MPA. And the reason for that is that, as I mentioned before, eager to progressive, you could theoretically picture how you could do that in a single page app. You could kind of like just split it up and like, as long as the framework supported pause and resume hydration, which some frameworks do support. Any framework that supports streaming has to support pause and resume hydration, if you think about it. Like what React calls selective hydration. Because essentially you render part of the page, hydrate part of the page, while the rest of the page is still coming in, and then you can resume and hydrate some more.
Pause and resume hydration is a different concept than the green axis we have, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm saying it's progressive. It's actually
But do you see the confusion? Like if you say pause,
I think there's a term resume. I'm just saying that it's progressive. Like any framework that has streaming is progressive. So technically speaking, a single page app framework could do progressive hydration if it figured out how to load the code. It's just a little bit awkward because it has to run everything top down. So you can't like hydrate something down here before something here because of context and props and stuff. So like, I don't think it's really feasible. I'm just saying you could picture that. It would be possible if you could break things down enough that you could do something progressive in a single page app. However, partial, using the knowledge of server versus client, is basically impossible in a single page app framework because you need to render the stuff in the client. All you can do is try and do like multi-bundle techniques. It becomes very difficult to actually.
I mean, in what we were talking about, where what you're doing is checking whether something is sort of inert or not, you could do that in an SPA. You could be like, oh, that component, needs to like uses its props, and that component just renders its props, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, if you could serialize the props down the tree, then you could do some amount of progressive or eager, but you can never change the fact that it's going to load eventually in the client in a single page app, which is why when single page app frameworks tell me that they're going to add partial hydration, I'm like, have you looked at partial hydration? Do you understand what it is? Because it's like, it's not something you just add.
So you're saying routing is important to making partial hydration happen.
Yes. It's the only thing that really it kind of like sits on. Okay. Because I do actually have like, if not this one, where is it? I did actually make more tables here because the partial, see, I have partial and I have eager progressive, like we've been talking about. So just to kind of get into this, what is bundled? None is nothing. So I put none and full here just to kind of show.
None meaning it's client rendered app?
None meaning that it's static route.
Oh,
gotcha. I just
okay.
needed to show it somewhere. So this is just not interesting. So really, we're partial to full is our spectrum here. And partial is what's bundled, the interactive islands. What is serialized, not very much, just the props that come into the components, essentially, into those islands.
Because you don't need to, like, the staticky parts, you don't need to serialize that. That's because you just care about the end HTML.
Well, yeah, exactly. So you only need the stuff you need in those client components.
Yeah.
And routing, not client, essentially. We had all those routing techniques from the other day, and all of these could support partial except for like client routing, like all our common routers, like things like React Router and stuff. You don't get to do partial hydration with that. Like, unless you change the architecture, essentially, into the kind of getting into a different zone, you don't get partial hydration in something like Remix or Svelte or whatever. So, or Solid Start, really, for that matter. I mean, you could build a new architecture in there, but like using the router the way they are today, you don't get that. So essentially, that's kind of the whole partial story we've been talking about. But then eager, I had nothing to really say here other than when you go from eager to progressive, the thing that is most affected is when you're eager, the thing that takes a hit is the time to interactive, because it takes longer. You're doing all that processing work up front. And when you go progressive, the thing that takes the hit is the first input delay, or like
so the idea behind this is like, okay, so this is why you were saying the idle, I'm never going to remember the function that it's called, but the idle thing is kind of a free win because you're not waiting for an interaction. You're waiting for the browser to be done with what it was doing. So it just like...
It's as close as you can get. The only problem with idle is the second you go, yep, I'm idle, and then it starts doing it, and then the person's like, I'm doing stuff now. Well, you're not idle, and
right. Okay, fine. So you're idle is like your best guess that the user is still taking in the page.
Yeah, it's tricky, and you can look at it and do some heuristics. I'm just my gut, if people want to know where I sit personally, is that progressive is overrated. Like generally speaking, I think it is necessary, and I think there are places where you should be progressive, but just treating it as the default and being like I'm 0K but B like default is not a reasonable place to be once your page gets beyond a toy demo. Like there is critical JS. There's a certain part of the page, like if you look at your page and you go, this is above the fold. Like there's 10 to 20 kilobytes. If you're getting progressive below 10 to 20 kilobytes, you're probably hurting yourself more than you're helping yourself.
Right. And that's kind of the idea of critical JS sounds to me why you want to combine partial with progressive, because that lets you load the stuff you really need sooner.
Right. Because if you have progressive without partial, you don't know, like you can't be that eager. Like you'd have to load everything. You don't know what you don't have. And then you have to use interaction to make that decision. Like you have to use clicks at that point because you don't know that you can't render the rest of the page if you don't use partial. So partial is like it's very, in my mind, very, very important because it as I said, it makes things smaller. It makes things okay. And cool. I want to show more on that. So that's why we're going to keep moving along here because I want to get to our last arrow, which is
I'm really sort of the last arrow. The later it gets, the stupider I get. So
so let's talk replayable links resumable because this is a newer thing. It's funny. I mean these other ones I mentioned. I mean Michael mentioned that Preact and Vue were doing some stuff like Astro before Astro was doing. And that's true. I did load up an article about similar to islands, progressive loading island techniques in Preact from 2019. So that is true. But I mean, they were like these little kind of side projects. Astro is the first framework that's like, this is what we do. Like, this is the framework. Partial is obviously Marco's made its name for itself on partial. Astro does progressive and partial, and progressive like that is kind of been where it's made it. Resumable pretty much goes completely to Mishko, Hevery, and Quick. Even though we on the Marco team we completely independently, kind of like Isaac Newton and Leibniz or whatever, like found the same solution. You go back.
Wait, is Marco doing this now?
Resumable? Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, because Marco 6 is resumable, partial, and eager.
Isn't the whole idea? All right, you're gonna have to explain to me how resumable can be eager, but whatever.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
This is what I want to get is that. But I watched recently. Mishko was talking about resumability in 2019. He had this all figured out when he was working on the Angular team, and he's like, I know what I want to build. I just need the means to build it. So this has been his dream, this resumable, replayable thing. And it's funny, we got
that's how Steve tells it. He's like, I found this guy who knew what he wanted to build, but he was stuck on the Angular team.
Well, and this is the part of the problem, right? And I mean, sometimes with Angular or Ember, I see these huge engineering efforts that solve probably really big problems, but they don't always translate down to the end user. So you get this kind of interesting thing that when you're like looking for innovation in frameworks, you might not be paying attention to them. Like Ember worked on this really cool bytecode thing for compressing their templates that improves the template speed. And I did a little experiment, and I'm like, if the templates aren't the right size, this is an overhead, it hurts performance. But for whatever they were working on Glimmer, it actually mattered. And Angular was working on Ivy, which is this crazy engine. And at a time when everyone was like, Svelte, like, get rid of it. Here's the Angular team.
I feel like this is like my classic example of this is no one except for you can explain to me why the React VDOM is better than the Preact VDOM. And it's because it only matters when you're working on these ginormous projects.
Right. And the thing is that I feel kind of bad about it, because I look at like every framework I can and study the implementations and learn all the stuff and the secrets and the performance and stuff. Angular is not on that list. It's never been on that list.
You're saying you're not really interested in it?
part of it was a learning, like it was a thing, but the other part was I was like looking at the problems they were solving and stuff. It never occurred to me, which is why if we had seen Mishko's talk 2 years ago, we might have been, or 3 years ago, we might have been in a different place. Instead of we completely independently came to the same conclusions and redid all the same work, even though he basically explained it to everyone 3 years ago. Because it's funny because, as I said, if any other framework had done it, I probably would have known about it. But it's kind of funny. But where I was getting at is resumability is do not repeat any work in the browser that is already done on the server.
Which so far seems totally counter the idea of hydration, which was basically go run a bunch of this code again.
Right, which is why Mishko Hevery says that resumability is not hydration.
Which it's not even that important to get into that semantic discussion. We can just call it because you can talk about hydration by the technical means, but you can also talk about hydration in terms of the end goal, which is you want to get your page interactive. And that's what we're talking about with resumability.
That's the thing. Mishko has this great article where he explains it all in detail, and he starts with the Wikipedia definition. And when I was helping him edit the thing, I'm like, can we find a different definition? Because the Wikipedia definition says that hydration is just attaching event handlers, and you're going to try and explain to everyone why hydration is super, super expensive because it does all this stuff, but you start with a definition that says it's just event handlers. So it sounds like you're maybe inventing all this stuff for the hydration. And the real rub of it is resumable hydration is just event handlers. So you come back to the original definition, then it's resumable hydration because it agrees with what Wikipedia says hydration is.
So let's talk a little bit about how you accomplish this. So on the replayable side of the spectrum, what you're doing is pulling the code that creates the components, you're pulling a bunch of JavaScript. What is that JavaScript? It's like all the JavaScript that corresponds.
It's literally it doesn't matter whether it's partial or progressive or whatever. Once you get to where the code has to run, when you're resumable, you just run that code downwards, right?
Right. This is an important point that you make in your article that, in my opinion, can be sometimes hard to understand. When you get to the point where you're doing hydration, if you want to hydrate this component and it's in a tree, you have to hydrate the entire tree, something like that. What's that point you try to make about starting somewhere you have to render all the way down?
I always show that. Once you go, okay, I need to hydrate this info component because it's stateful, it does something. Any of these things could re-render, and it's actually really simple because they pass props, and you pass state through. You're kind of trapped once you hit that dynamic point that could change in the client. And the reason for this is because, most frameworks have something called components. And you got to render those components one thing.
It's even if you, let's say info has an event handler in it, so you want info to be interactive, you have to load profile too if profile passes props to info, right?
Well, only props that could statefully change. If profiles props into info if profile doesn't have state itself, it doesn't have something that can change, these props will never change.
I guess what I'm saying is if the source of the state was higher up the tree, you have to render the thing up the tree, right?
Yes, because that's how the frameworks work, right? Because they render based on components. Because if that state could change, that component needs to re-render, which means you need that code, which is how I ended up on the Marco team, if anyone's interested, because they were like, okay, this is really tricky problem to solve. We don't want to send all this code down here when we know that this hero is static. We don't want to do this. And then it's but we got to re-render the components. And then solid.js was components aren't a real thing.
Yeah.
It actually plays into it because the answer to this stuff actually is going more fine-grained. It's actually fine-grained reactivity is actually the answer to the whole hydration problem.
Yeah.
Interesting. But that's a bit of a tangent. But what I wanted to get at is that, yes, once you get to that point, it's top down. And to be fair, I said that fine grain helps us solve this problem, but it's more than that. We can't rely on only serializing our inputs, like our props coming in. If we want to actually resume where we left off, we need to serialize all the state.
Yeah, this is kind of one of my biggest questions in reading Mishko's article, was that it's not super clear to me as a reader what is app state and what is framework state. Why are these two different things, and like, what does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, and that, yeah, he introduces it as two concepts. And the thing is, app state is like this typical stuff that you serialize. It's the JSON stuff that I'm not serializing in Marco, but it's like this state. This is app state.
Okay. So, okay, yeah, keep going.
But like framework state is more of like the internals that the framework needs to do. Like if you're in React, you need to be able to see, if you want to resume, you actually have to know what state all the hooks are in.
Right. It's okay. It's kind of it's the whole like memory versus storage concept.
Right. Because the whole thing is, in reactive system, you'd have to serialize the values in your computeds and your signals and all that stuff to actually do it. And that means all that stuff needs to be serializable, which is can be kind of awkward, right?
So this is kind of like, in order to do this, in order to pass on the framework state, like literally pass on the execution kind of from the server to the client, don't you need a custom, like, can you do this with a React? Can you like serialize where React is, or do you need a custom React?
You need a couple things. You need something that can aggressively serialize itself, like all its state, and send it across and be able to restore it from it. And you also need your renderer to render enough stuff into the browser, especially Mishko always focuses on this HTML element thing. Most hydration actually uses HTML and script tags and all that. Passing hierarchical data through the DOM during hydration is pretty standard, but the thing is, you need to do a little bit better than that. Like you saw that in previous streams, you might have seen that in Quick, there's let's pick something.
I love these little
You'll see all these Q objects, and what he's serializing it this way, but there's other ways to do this.
I mean, you could serialize by like sticking something in the head, right?
Right, you could put the script tag there. You do need some hierarchical stuff, because like if you can also do stuff like here, where let's see what's inspect here, because this example here is resumable. This is Marco 6, by the way. Like there's some markers in here that give it the information it needs. You don't necessarily have to serialize everything. There are event handlers, which Quick does for delegation, which help there, and Marco has a slightly different approach. But essentially, you have to serialize some stuff into the DOM, and then essentially, that was what I was looking for. It's this one. You have to basically serialize enough information so that you can do the event delegation. So you like know, where the events that you call. There's two parts of this. You need to serialize enough so that when someone clicks on event somewhere in the tree, you go, oh, I know what the handler is without running the code top down. And the other thing you got to think of is most event handlers have state in them, like update some state. And if you never ran the code to initialize that state, you actually have to basically hoist that out into some kind of, you need to have the reference in the serialized data where that state lives. So you basically have to do this crazy amount of serialization so you can hoist everything out flat so that they can all be run independently. And this is what Misko explains in his article, and it's incredibly complicated, and I can understand it. But the key part, and the reason I introduced this concept this way, is being resumable doesn't mean you have to be progressive, because it doesn't mean you have to wait to load the JavaScript till you do that click. It just means you don't. It just means you don't run things in the browser you don't need to, because the thing is, when the page loads, you just add those event handlers, right? And then nothing happens. You are interactive at that point. If you're progressive, like Quick, what ends up happening is you go here and there's no JavaScript code on the page at this point, and then you click this, and then it loads the JavaScript. But in Marco, right?
Yeah, this is what I want to know about. Like Mishko's version it's almost like the way he explains it. It's almost like you gotta be progressive to do this.
But in the Marco version right here, that's funny. This version's slightly different size than the other version. Doesn't matter. In the which I had another one too. Which one's HN? Or sorry, Marco 6. Yeah, this isn't the Netlify version. But what I wanted to show is in the Marco version, which also is resumable, the JavaScript loaded right away, but it's still not going to do anything at this point until you click it. That's when it executes it. It doesn't matter when you load the JavaScript. What matters is when you actually run the code, because the difference is with Replayable, you have to run code to make it interactive. You have to like go through and run the components. With Resumable, you don't need to run the code. And the first code that gets run is when you actually interact with the page. In Quick, at that point, you load the JavaScript. In Marco, you just run the code.
So what you're doing here is you're separating the loading story from the execution story. So exactly. In Mishko's example, he's like, yeah, you know what we do? Like we set up these almost like placeholder or like factory events where like when you click on it, it says, oh, let me go figure out what to do and then do it. Whereas in Marco, you have all the information needed from the beginning. You have all the JavaScript. All you do is, well, your benefit is that JavaScript is just about events. You're not loading, how do I build a component, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. But the thing is, it's because Marco's partial. So Marco knows, so it doesn't. It loads it eagerly, but it knows that it knows what it doesn't have to load without.
It's partial and it's resumable in the sense that when something does need to be interactive, you need to send way less information than if it wasn't resumable, because all you have to do is send.
Well, no, let's. Can I go through my table? This might help.
Yeah, do it.
See, Replayable, you have to execute the components. Resumable, you don't. You have to restore the state on Replayable. Resumable, you don't. It's all serialized for you. I added this column because Misko doesn't talk about this, but you always have to run client-side effects, because let's face it, if you have something that only runs in the browser, you need to do that. Today in Quick, they actually run the browser stuff on the server because they have the browser on the server, but I don't know if that's going to stay, because that's a huge.
I mean, what if you have a console log, like, or an alert?
Right, exactly. Like there are always like, it's like the on mount or the create effect and solid. There's those, you need those to run on the browser, and the problem is you can't load those. Like those have to, like, you can't load those progressively, because like the expectation is that they're there when the page loads. So you have to do that. So these get hoisted out. Quick has an event for it specifically where you can register code for it. In Marco, our effects just get pulled out of the components. You don't have to run the components to run the list of effects. And then you have to attach the global event listeners. And then the execution cost for Replayable is pretty high. It's running the whole tree. I said Resumable is low. It's literally just running these two things, right? Because essentially, if there was no event handlers, I mean, you wouldn't be doing much, but sorry, if there's no effects, all you're doing is going through, and I think Mishko has an example in his article. Like all you're doing essentially, if there's no effects, you're just going through the list of events and adding the event handlers, the global event handlers, and they know how to use the information that's serialized to call the right events because they've all been extracted out. But when I say low, I mean like really low, like literally this, and any like the alert or whatever we talked about. So,
okay.
But there's a trade-off here because replayable, you just serialize that one chunk of data. Resumable, you have to serialize almost everything.
And the reason why is because you're not restoring state, but you still need state, right? Like you're not running the components to get to the state where for the event to work, but the event still depends on all that other stuff.
It's a really simple idea. The server already did the work of calculating everything for you. Just send that along so you don't have to run it again. So in a sense, resumable isn't hydration because it doesn't do the hydration dance because it already rendered on the server. But the thing is, the cost here is the serialization is high. And I think this is important because the bigger the page gets, the more complicated it gets. This becomes concerning how big the resumable, like how high it is. So essentially, when you're resumable, you might want to be progressive from the sense that if things get really expensive, like really complicated, you maybe there's too much code. But for like in my opinion, just kind of sit here for a second, what actually counteracts the effects of resumability is partial. Because if your serialization cost is high, partial eliminates serialization automatically.
Because it just says only load that serialized data when you need it.
Well, it's not when you need it. Partial is like
Oh, sorry, we're not talking about progressive. I was thinking progressive. Okay, yes. Partial. Yeah.
But progressive doesn't help you save serialization.
Well, yeah, it just moves the timing.
It has nothing to do with serialization because progressive just like when the code loads. But
I was saying if you have a bunch of data to ship it at a good time. But you're saying you can actually reduce the serialization itself.
Right, because because of our tree, right? When you like, you know that you don't have to serialize this data. If you're not partial, you have to serialize this data because you don't know. And if you're resumable, you literally have to serialize everything. Whereas if you're partial, you know not to serialize that stuff. And we're talking component level. If you could somehow get partial at a sub-component level where you're only talking about the stateful paths, then you can reduce the serialization even more. So essentially what I'm getting at is like resumable is a trade-off between execution and like bandwidth, right? Like essentially low execution because you serialize everything. Partial is all about reducing the serialization and the code. So like, and then progressive is making sure that the code shows up like in pieces. So like you want all three ultimately.
Yeah.
But the thing is, for your critical code, you want it to be eager. And you can't be eager and not load all the code unless you're partial. And if you're resumable, like
you're basically saying that the reason why Marco is cool with being eager is because it's so good at being partial.
Exactly, which basically fights the resumability. I mean, if you want to understand a little bit about what this actually looks like, we only have to look at the difference between like these frameworks, right?
Did you do a quick hacker news?
Yeah, that's what we've been looking at.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so if we're talking Astro, yeah, let's do Astro. So like none of them need to use any JavaScript on here because they're smart. But once you go to a comments page, I was boasting, how solid Astro is only 4.8 kilobytes. It's really small because it uses that partial information really quite well, right? And it manages to do this, right? And we saw Marco 5 also before, but Marco 5 is a little bit older, right? 18.7 kilobytes. It's and actually this is something that Beat adds, which is garbage, so we can ignore this one. So it's actually more like 17.8 kilobytes. But essentially, it kind of still uses the knowledge to save that serialization, right? And what I actually worked with Amisco today, they have a way of you manually telling the data not to serialize instead of being automatic. If you know what you're dealing with, you can save the serialization to a certain point. And I actually did this. I actually went through and did a recursive, because I know that I don't use any of the data here. I actually manually.
When you say manually, you mean the developer explicitly says this is.
Don't serialize this. I made it a recursive non-serializer. So it is possible with Quick to do this. It's just not automatic. And you kind of have to know how your app's rendering and how state is used to do it manually.
So let's be clear, like Quick is not really partial.
No, Quick is not partial, no.
Great. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, like this see?
It doesn't really look at your, okay, I get it. Okay, so by the way, one question I just realized I sort of had about resumability. If you're resumable, you don't really have, let's say somehow, I don't know, solid, you had a resumable solid. You wouldn't have solid in the browser at the end of the day.
No, well, I mean, it'd be different. Like you
don't have to load the,
what a resumable solid would look like is you would hoist out the reactive statements out of the components, so they're all like top level essentially, and all the ways they communicate with each other, all the signals would be in like a large array, let's say. And you'd serialize the signal information, like the dependencies on the server. So you'd actually track all the dependencies while you're running on the server, serialize that and the value into this array. And then when the app started up and you've hoisted out the events, when someone say clicks on something, it would go and go, oh, this reads or sets the signal, or it goes to this place and location. It'd look and go, oh, this is a signal, and it'd create a signal at that point with the set dependency, it would basically recreate from the serialized data the signal on the fly as you did your first interaction.
So so because of this, it doesn't really, like, let's say I have an app with a lot of interdependent things where like one signal will update tons of stuff on the page. That is not an overhead with resumability, because it's not like the code you're running or loading is like literally code to update one piece of DOM. It's like you can get the benefit of something like a signal and a dependency array even in a resumability model.
Yeah, what I was going to say there is there is an overhead because you have to serialize all those dependencies. But from an execution standpoint, we don't have to run the app. If that helps you.
I for some reason in my mind right now is like a resumable svelte where you just have thousands of like DOM code like lines being run, because I don't know.
No, resumability, in my opinion, is possible with single page app frameworks. It's just they might not go that way, because to be resumable, all your state needs to be serializable. So if your state everywhere is serializable, it's tricky. And one thing that, like as I mentioned, is if you do it at component level for serialization, you can kind of trust maybe the boundaries are a good place, and like that's why Quick's got the $sign. Like you kind of know where you're entering and exiting things. One of the interesting things about Marco 6's approach here is that it's so granular on the reactive graph that we could even determine what parts of the reactive graph don't need to be serialized. And this is a little bit complicated, but essentially, if you know that you're only ever going to resume, as in like write a new signal, then that means that, and it's like used in the DOM, you don't need to serialize any of the, if there's no convergence of different values, you don't need to serialize any of the derivations in between, because it's already in the DOM, and when you update it, it's going to run from that signal downward again. So essentially, Marco can use the reactive graph to actually skip serialization of intermediate values, because it knows that they would never calculate unless you set a new signal again. So like this is getting super technical, but with really fine-grained partial hydration, you can actually reduce the resumability at like a graph level, like that serialization cost. But
it's a continuation of what you were saying before, which is if you move from the idea of components being important to the idea of state and the relationships being important, you have a better overhead situation.
right. And I mean, quick breaks things up by events, by view, and by state. But they're gonna start breaking stuff more up by state in the future, I'm sure. Marco is everything's by reactive graph state, and as I said, it's incredible when you kind of look at what you can do here, because as I showed you, like Marco 5 or 4 or 5 is fine and it's kind of similar. But when you look at something, I showed you Astro, it's like 4.8 kilobytes. Quick is interesting because when you load the page, you get nothing because it's progressive. And then when you click on it, you load, as I mentioned, this route is actually mostly Vite garbage. Vite adds like a kilobyte to most things. But if we ignore that route, essentially, we end up, so Quick's like 15 kilobytes essentially, because Quick itself is 14 kilobytes and it only loaded about 1 kilobyte for the one code. If we can actually see it here, I love this. You can actually, this is like the toggle component. It's a little hard to see, but you can see toggle on render, on click, minus, plus, collapsed. It basically knows that it only needs to serialize this little, or not serialize, it only needs to send the code for this thing when we click on it because it's pretty fine-grained. So nothing else loads. It's Quick itself and this component. But when you bundle it, if you go in it, I've got like 8 or 10 files bundled because Quick doesn't know which components could load. So it's kind of interesting. So, and Quick doesn't know what features you load. So Quick is 14 kilobytes and it loads this 1 kilobyte thing when you interact with it. Astro, using its partial knowledge, all in is 4.8 kilobytes because it like Solid knows only what's used and Astro knows what's used. So we're able to tree shake most of the code away. So it's super, super small to do this. And as I mentioned, Marco 5 was kind of big, but Marco 6 is 1.6 kilobytes all in. That's the whole framework. All the component code for this page is 1.6 kilobytes. So it's able to use its partial knowledge to such a degree that it doesn't serialize the data, it doesn't send the components it doesn't need, and it tree shakes out most of the library. Just for reference, Svelte runtime is 1.8 kilobytes. So this whole page is small.
And this scales well with Marco. Like Marco, you never building a Marco app and you're like, oh, I wish this was progressive like Quick because this is.
Well, I mean, yeah, you probably will, but like we don't know how far this goes, right? Because we haven't tried it, right? Because Marco 4 or 5, we saw on eBay, reduced 80% of the code. So our 400 kilobyte apps are 80 kilobytes with like turning partial hydration on. So it is possible in those 80 kilobytes that we'd want to progressively load something conceivably.
So
that's about the range. I feel like once you're building apps where you're talking about 0.5 meg compressed of JavaScript, then in my opinion, that's probably when progressive starts mattering.
Yeah. And because we have to start wrapping up because my brain's falling apart. Each of these 3 frameworks, Marco, Quick, and Astro, are missing one of the axes, right? So yes. Astro is missing resumability, but it's progressive and it's partial. Yeah. Quick is missing partial, but it's progressive and resumable. And Marco is missing the progressive stuff. So cool. That's very beautiful, honestly. I feel like we should just make a new table where that's all it is. Because there was like some other stuff in your table. We should do just those 3 because those 3 are such good examples. Yeah, and so there's this idea, like, because Astro is the only one of these things I use, and I'm thinking to myself, well, what if one of the islands was like a resumable island?
Yeah, I mean, that has definitely crossed my mind, being an author of a framework that is also not on this table. But yes, I think that's interesting. The biggest thing is because because Quick handles progressive and Marco handles like partial, there hasn't been really an incentive to work necessarily with Astro because like they cover
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I want to do a new table that's just these last 3 columns effectively.
Because I wrote here, there's still some nuance here. Like progressive plus resumable does a decent impression of partial because it doesn't like load all the code, and partial plus resumable removes a lot of the impact of progressive. Like we're saying, like you have to,
yeah,
you I mean, this is a stupid example, but like here's the thing. We talked at the beginning about how we could get back to where we need to go, and it's funny. Jacob eBay from Remix team, I think he was kind of annoyed at how after that whole progressive thing that came out, there's that thread on Twitter where essentially, see, you can see why this table is kind of misleading, but there was a thread on Twitter a while back where Jacob had said something along the lines of like, there'll never be a good partial hydration demo because it's like too hard. There are none, and it will never come to fruition due to the sheer complexity required at compile time, right? And because Ryan was asking about partial hydration demos, and then I was like, well, this is Marco 5 too. This is Marco 6. Like, you can see the obvious benefit here, right? And Marco 6 is like, yeah, I mean, depends on the test.
Oh yeah, sorry. Where's Remix on these 3 lines?
I mean, it's the same as everything. It's eager, full, replayable.
Why? Oh, right, because they like the idea of your static.
Yeah, progressive enhancement thing, right? Yeah, but what I was trying to get at here on this whole kind of thing is, because of this, Jacob actually made a demo where he's like, look, we can go static. This is the brutal page, right? And what he did, I love this, is he turned off React in the browser, and he what did he do here? I love this one. Let's see if I can get the page here. He turned off React in the browser, and he wrote a script here under the serialization data. Here we go. Document, add event listener, click. So global event listener, look for the class attributes, toggle. So this uses vanilla JavaScript.
Oh, I love this.
Right? We were talking about what it would take. And I actually grabbed this, minified it, and gzipped it. And it's 230 bytes.
Right. We just replaced React with,
Right, but for this page, it's mostly static. So essentially, for 230 bytes on a PHP page or an Astro static or React static page, that's how much JavaScript it actually takes to add this functionality. 230 bytes of code.
So you're saying like this is a perfect demonstration of partial, because the idea is like everything's static. Why do you need React?
Right. But here's the thing. Yeah, I was amused by this because like ultimately going out of your way to actually write this whole thing is like kind of like my point, because like Marco 6, you just write React, and what do you get? Marco 6, it's 1.6 kilobytes versus 230 bytes. So yes, Marco 6 is 8 times larger than the vanilla JavaScript needed to hydrate this page, but you write it like React.
Yeah, very small multiplier when you don't have to think about it.
Right. Astro even is 4.8. Like we're what's that? That's was times 5 times.
But Astro is loading React.
No, it's loading solid. But yes, this is.
That's solid. My point. Like if you were using React, it would be loading React. So
I mean that's. But I'm just saying, Astro Solid, one of the smallest combinations. It's probably like there might be some way to get X element or something, but that's basically in our vanilla thing. I'm talking about fully declared.
Yeah, you don't have to write a second app.
Yeah, I'm pretty like this one Svelte might like edge us out by like half a kilobyte or something. But let's assume this is about as small as we get with Astro. That's 20 times larger than vanilla, but we're still in good shape, because just think about this, because Next.js, for the stupid page that is mostly static that just does this, when you think about it, as I said, Marco's 8 times bigger than VanillaJS, and Next is 83. So
Next is 83, and Remix doesn't improve on this, does it?
Oh, I mean a little bit. Remix is 62.
But like but like effectively the architecture is the same in terms of it has to load
63. So yeah, I mean, take your pick. Essentially, Next is 400 times larger than the vanilla JavaScript you need, and Remix is 300 times larger than the vanilla JavaScript you need. So so essentially, this is a stupid example, in that it's like so simplistic. But what I'm getting at, actually, sorry, I was on the wrong page. I should load the JavaScript for this page. Yeah, so 62. Yeah, so roughly speaking, yeah, that's why this is kind of such a thing. Like in our VanillaJS, not jQuery, because jQuery is actually like 20 kilobytes itself, but in our VanillaJS example, which you have to handwrite and go through that, it's small. Marco has made this to the point that it's 8 times smaller, and our like React frameworks are 300 to 400 times smaller. Like, let me see, like something like Solid or Svelte, which are in the teens. Those ones, like, see, Svelte's 20 KB on this one, right? So that would be what, 2 times 5 times, so that'd be 5 times 20. So Svelte is 100 times bigger than the VanillaJS. But like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, I mean, I don't know if this is the right comparison to make, but what I'm getting at is there is a lot of room to improve there. And as I said, this is the closest we've seen yet. 1.6 kilobytes for fully interactive server rendered hydrated, well, not hydrated, resumable page is quite a nice thing, right? I mean,
so let me just, because I can't really think technically anymore, it's that time of night. If Quick says, like, let me just, like, the players here, if Quick says you can write literal React, they're just going to blow Remix out of the water, because the only reason why people want to use Remix over Marco is because it's React, right?
Well, I mean, here's the thing though. There are trade-offs for MPAs, which are real, right? We can't ignore that MPAs have
Quick relies on an MPA.
Yeah, if you want to get this code savings, yeah, that's what I'm saying. These are all multi-page apps. So this is still the split, right? I'm gonna use the Cloudflare version of all of these. I don't have the Cloudflare version of this, but Netlify Edge is probably close enough. But I'm just, yeah, let's just do this. I might have to run a couple of these a couple times, but let's just kind of wrap up, because we know what we know how it goes for what do you call it, for frameworks like Remix and Next and Solid Start. We have a hard time getting over 50 on this page. Like, it's almost impossible for us to get over 50 on this page. And let's see here. And this is that brutal page that we're all aware of brutally. And now that I'm doing this live, I'm okay. Right? This. So let's make sure. I hope that, okay, this one's not going to work because it's story. Watch my internet fail me now. Oh, let's double check that this URL is right. That URL is right. So why is page speed is not being nice to me today? So maybe we don't get to do what I wanted to here. That's too bad. I wanted to see where we were standing. This is the fun part. I ran this earlier, and I was like, okay, we can talk about this, because yeah, as 84 for the Astro Solid, as I mentioned, there is a hit now because of that first paint blocking. But if you look at it, hydration is pretty good because of the idle. and the blocking time is pretty low, right? Let's give Marcus. The thing is, when I ran this earlier, I got 88s across the board for all three of these. I was like, there we go. Like, Quick has a bit heavier on the server rendering, which can sometimes time out the worker, which is probably
That's kind of scary. That's kind of scary, and the SSR is so hard, like so much work that it.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, yeah. Okay, here we go. So, yeah, so these are all actually kind of similar. Like 2.7 and then 3 seconds to interactive. So like 0.2 or 0.3 on the hydration, but very low blocking time for this. 230 for Marco 6. This was a really good blocking. The idle probably helped it a bit. This page load's taking a bit longer. Let's try doing another run. 87. Quick's a little bit quick for some reason. I'm getting more execution than I'm expecting on the hydration side, and the blocking's higher for that. So maybe we'll give it another run or so. Although Quick, we were having a hard time getting. Let's duplicate this tab. Getting runs going for it. So I'm going to leave the other one open just instead. Yeah, even better for Astra that time. Yeah. So I mean, what you can see though, these frameworks have the ability to. Where's my new Quick? Yeah. Okay. Quick is it's working sometimes and not the other time. Which this page is, as I said, mean. So maybe this is on the fringe of things. Maybe I just got to keep that result. I've seen Quick get higher than this. I've seen it get about 80. So
I still just one question. Like, you could do resumability with like a sort of SPA model.
Yes, but without partial, you'd be serializing everything, and without progress. Yeah,
there are smarter ways. Like, you can rely on other things than routes, right? I don't know what I'm saying at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think partial. It's interesting. I mean, to be fair, Quick has more isn't partial, so like you could use Quick to a single page app in theory.
I'm trying to see. I see this world where like Quick shows up and says, you can take your React app and just run it through our compiler, and now it's resumable.
Right. Or like coarser resumable. Yeah, exactly. I think that is like a reality a bit, but I mean, it's still, yeah, you could do it. I think the problem is like, if it's too fine grained, you got to do a lot of like the bundling is an interesting challenge, right? Because if you make the bundling super small, you can only load the parts you need, but if you don't know those parts, it's tricky to preload them. And if you make the bundling too coarse, the problem is that you don't know which pieces you need, so you're going to pull in code that you don't need.
Yeah, I mean, if you make it granular, yeah, no, that's actually a really interesting tension. I'm surprised I understood what you just said at 2 a.m.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go with these as probably. I mean,
the point is clear, is that they're all pretty good.
They're all very good on this page. Yeah, I mean, we're sitting here like trying to get the.
But it doesn't matter. Like, the point is very clear. Like,
well, I mean, the thing is, I mean, I don't have to go here again, but like, I mean.
You also started the stream off with an example of why these insights are not that great sometimes.
Right, exactly. Because I mean, you can look at the timeline and get a better idea. Page speed insights are useful too. But yeah, I think, yeah, I ran that one again. Yeah, sorry, I gotta actually put the story. I have to put the expensive page in. Yeah, yeah, and that's a point actually. The point bringing React into Quick would probably just be progressive and not resumable because
Oh, but
React.
that's not that interesting. That's
Oh,
no.
it's in islands, but
I don't
here's
want islands in Quick. I have islands in Astro.
right. But then, yeah. So yeah, I mean, it makes it. I think that's interesting though because it means that there's more competitors in this space, kind of other than just Astro. But yeah, look, Remix 46. Let's do Solid. Like these are like they're like a whole different level. Do you know what I mean? Like these are scoring in the mid to high the mid to 80s, right? Oh, Solid 46 too. Ooh. Svelte, shall we? Like 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 essentially. Oh, what happened? Did I put the wrong URL in? Svelte Hacker News. Oh no, right. It's this one's on Svelte is on a different one. Sorry, just give me 6 seconds. Svelte pages dev, yeah. Svelte pages dev. It's still workers, it's still the edge, it's still the same crap. But you get what I'm saying, right? These are the single page app frameworks are like half of what the partial hydration frameworks are essentially. Yeah, this one gonna be 46 too. Oh, it's 44 this time, but it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like Remix, Solid Start, Svelte Kit. What's next?
Yeah, I mean, now that you've shown me all this, I know a lot more of what you mean when you talk about whether Solid Start wants to be in the future or in the present.
Yeah, because I mean, let's do next too. I mean, these single page app frameworks are going to struggle here for this kind of workload comparatively, right? Where's next? 45, right? So what I mean, it's all this like what was it? SvelteKit was 44 this time, but it's whatever. Next was 45. Remix was 46. Solid Start was 46. Like we're like at that point, like just yeah. I mean, it's they have to serialize the data, which takes rendering time. The hydration costs are a couple seconds. They all block for about 2 seconds on this page. It's just kind of the reality of
Yeah, it's also. I mean, it does bother me a little bit that we keep like using Hacker News example. I don't know if you know about what apps I create. I create highly interactive. It's kind of both content driven because it's like digital humanities, so it's like content driven, but like the islands are really interactive. It does not matter if you have a little bit of blocking time because like the reader is there to read, to sit
right.
down.
Right,
So
but so it depends on what your use case is.
yeah,
I mean, that's the thing. This might not this when it sounds like I'm being harsh on these guys, but I cover the frameworks that I like in here, as I mentioned, kind of thing. Again, like the things that I was interested in, So if I'm talking about Remix, or I'm talking about SvelteKit or Solid Start and doing this, it's because I really like those
yeah. I
frameworks,
think like
and and
yeah.
and so when they come out and you hear the guys on this Remix Kit going, oh yeah, we'll think about adding partial hydration, and I go like, it's okay, like you don't have
Don't have
to
to do that. You can be an SPA. It's fine.
or make that decision when you have the information or whatever. But it's like, as we mentioned, like partial hydration and single page apps are basically incompatible. So it's okay, because here's the thing: not everyone needs to be doing this. Do you know where where this matters?
Maybe they're saying use their isomorphic router to create an MPA.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm like, you can't. It's not going like. Then you're gonna be hand doing it, and Yeah, like to me, it's like this is okay. Like the only type of sites that probably care to this level are e-commerce.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of why a lot of this, I like me personally, like I am like most of the things I want to build are kind of like SPAs, or they're sites where you want some of the content to appear really quickly, but like the rest you can wait.
Yeah.
So it really does depend on your use case. I think e-commerce is like such a fun example because it helps you argue about frameworks, but your average solo developer will never make one.
I am not at all concerned with solid start score on here because it makes sense. And I want to improve hydration. If I can, if I can get us over 50, if I can get us to 60, that's great. You
Yeah.
know, but I mean, there's a there's a reason why, like we went through, there's a reason why Next is 80 kilobytes and Marco is 1 kilobyte or 1.5 kilobytes or whatever. Like there's and maybe there's a reason why Svelte's 20 kilobytes and Solid's 13 kilobytes. Like they just fit where they make sense to fit, and for the use case that they make sense for. It's kind of like if you want to do e-commerce, use Marco.
I mean, like
maybe Astro is looking like they could be a real e-commerce contender now. Like, so you see your e-commerce frameworks right here. And then if you want to build something more interactive, well, all of these are really, really great choices.
Yeah, I think that's just like an important point for sure. It's like, I don't know what I'm saying here. Like,
I will be critical sometimes when someone tells me that they're building their e-commerce site on Next.js.
yeah. I mean, and it's like I get the sense that Rich Harris doesn't want to build e-commerce sites. He doesn't care. Like,
and yeah, I mean, yeah, and to be fair, even in those cases, like this is a brutal test, which is really a big equalizer for all the SPA frameworks. But there are and it doesn't have much code, but there are places where Svelte or Solid actually still has an advantage over React and Remix and Next and those ones on its size. So
you're seeing within the non-e-commerce ones, you've got your React ones and your Solid Svelte ones, and there's a difference.
Yes.
Yeah.
So like there's 3 grades here, so to speak. And in the case of Astro, the choice of the choice of Solid or Svelte versus a choice of React actually is what makes this possible. Like if you use React with Astro, this is not what's happening. You need to use Svelte.
If you use Preact, you're okay.
Preact is good, yeah.
I like that they have Preact support, and I hope most Astro users choose that one.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we've seen on Twitter. Like when they poured the app over, and they're like, "Oh, I just poured my next app over to Astro," and it wasn't Theo, but someone else. I think it was. They did it, and they're talking about smaller ones. I'm like, that doesn't add up. How is your site only 20 kilobytes in Astro? I'm like, the React is bigger than 20 kilobytes. And they're like, oh, and we moved it to Preact. I'm like,
Preact,
oh,
yep.
Okay. And I'm like, okay, so there you go. So your 300 kilobyte React Next site became 20 kilobytes in Astro. But I mean, it's moving to Astro, and you move to Preact, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's options. I think we've been kind of we're getting to the end, as you said, of this Hacker News demo, because the truth of the matter is I wanted to see how far we could push the boundaries. And it's like absolutely insane to me too, because like think about this for a second. Quick and Astro are doing progressive hydration. They're actually not loading the code on this page like right away. It's not actually impacting it. Marco is doing its full resumable hydration and code loading,
and still getting there. No, it's great.
And it's 1.6 kilobytes. That's why this thing is going out the window, because like if you think about it, this page should be like 1 kilobyte or whatever. We said
like you're saying you should choose an example where Marco ends up being like, oh no, I had to load a lot of code up front.
Yeah, exactly. But the problem is, how big of an example would we have to make to get there? Like,
images.
no
Bro,
toy.
images have nothing to do with this. I don't know why I said that.
Yeah, they're saying no toy demo is going to get me there. The real world demo is not going to get us there. Like, we would have to build a substantial site in every framework to get there. So we need to think of, I think a benchmark is
basically what you just said is, maybe we should use an e-commerce site to test the e-commerce frameworks.
right, but it's not even. Yeah, but like, yeah, we need a site, and maybe the answer to that is what they're doing over at Builder. Like, maybe Steve's remade Builder.io's homepage in like every framework, and he has mitosis to do it.
Yeah, Builder.io is like a big corporate homepage. Is the idea.
Right. So maybe that's a test. I don't know. I've been thinking about this recently, but benchmarking this in a way that doesn't rely on page speed, which hides stuff. Like the Marco 6 doesn't have streaming yet. So these examples are actually identical. They're non-streaming SSR with, like, you know what I mean, like with their hydration techniques or whatever. So like I think that we just need I don't know, a new benchmark, a new test, a new way of looking at this, because like as I've mentioned before, like Page Insights doesn't punish, but it doesn't give the benefit. It hides the benefit of streaming, for example. Like that's one thing it does, because from what we can tell, it has the same problem that Lighthouse has, where it applies like an equal simulated latency, which hides the real cost of server rendering. So like, we're not seeing the full picture here. And I think that, we need better tests, better understanding. This is a good rough estimate. It's enough that when I do something stupid like this, that we can kind of go, okay, we see the frameworks that are on this side and this one. What's interesting is, even in the last couple months, like last time I ran Quick, it was in the 60s, and Quick has gone from 60 to 74 here. Right? It's gone up 15 points in like a month. Marco 5 was 76, I want to say. So moving to Marco 6 jumped it another 11 points. Astro is still just hit 1.0 with the SSR, like beta, like not even the full 1.0, like a few weeks ago. What we've seen in a very short time is these frameworks on the MPA hydration side actually like separate. Like the gap is getting larger between them and the single page app frameworks here. So like this is still a moving thing, and we're going to need better ways to measure it. All right. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, everyone can let
so far all the benchmarks, like you say the same thing about the JS benchmarks.
Yeah. I mean, JS framework benchmark, I feel better about than this though. He does a serious look at painting and stuff. I said the benchmarks and the scenarios you have to take with a grain of salt, but the measurement is sound. And like
also, is this even open source? Like, how transparent is this? Like, can you see how this works? The page speed insights? Can you hack it?
I'm not sure. The funny thing is, we know that all this stuff is, like, a lot of the stuff is simulated. So yeah, I mean,
like it depends on their server. That's very different than JS benchmark, right?
I mean, he does run everything on his server for the official results to kind of keep it. And I mean, so yeah, this is one of those things where, like, it just needs to be better. But I even crudely, we can actually still see some benefits here. Anyways, to get it back around to wrapping it up, we went through the tables to look at the difference. We talked about viewing these things as 3 separate scales. I hope that it's clear to everyone now that, like, it isn't a level up game. Like, that essentially, the concept of eager and progressive, full and partial, and replayable, resumable are things that actually can be combinations. We've seen it, right? We saw it in my table, which we showed here, where the white ones are the opposite side of the spectrum, right? You have some of the older frameworks being eager, partial, and replayable. And then you get to Astro, which is progressive, partial, and replayable, and then Quick, which is progressive, full, and resumable. And then you have eager, partial, and resumable. So we have lots of different examples and kind of approaches that we can kind of play with and get an idea, because I think there's still stuff to learn. We have to find out what the real cost of data serialization is. So how important is partial? We need to figure out how important progressive is, right? Is resumable actually worth it? This is something that's actually on my mind a lot, because is there degrees of resumability?
I tell you, it doesn't matter for my apps because they're apps. So
no, here's the thing though, but we talked about this, is even if you're not progressive and not partial,
you can still be resumable.
It's actually desirable, because in your app, if you do server render, resumable just means that there's no uncanny valley.
I guess
your time to interactive is actually is your time to interactive should be almost zero.
Right, that's one thing I have to remember about resumable, because it's independent of partial. It could be useful for SPAs, but we just don't have it's not really Quick. Like, we need someone else to do it.
Yeah, I mean, Quick could be that solution, but Quick is interested in the progressive part, which you can't. The progressive part would be
that will ruin your app.
It would be very hard to do with MPAs or SPAs. When Michko talks at length about how other frameworks can't do this, React can't do this, they just not built that way. Even though it's technically, there might be some kind of trade-off that a future single-page app framework could do those things to a degree. Generally speaking, most of the progressive is actually where a lot of that constraint comes from. And partial is a whole other thing. If you want to actually get really good partial, I mean, you got to do some crazy stuff. The truth of the matter is, partial is basically incompatible with SPAs. So essentially, when we talk about React server components, even though they're SPA-like because they have like a smart routing, like a transitional router, all of these are actually kind of MPA in mentality. That's where the thing is. Server routing, we talked about it in the previous article or previous session when we went up here. Like, all of these except for client routing are basically an MPA type mentality, and that's to leverage these techniques, you probably going to want to be in this hybrid or transitional area, which means that if I'm being like, not every app needs this, but if I believe that our goal should be universal, one solution fits all, which I don't know is the right goal, you're going to be in a place with an MPA-like mentality, using probably hybrid or transitional routing and employing these sort of techniques to be able to ensure that your pages are snappy. That's just kind of how this works, but it's a completely different thing. That is not the frameworks today, and that's what makes React so exciting, is because they're like, look who they're still on this list. Like, this is a list of outlier frameworks, new frameworks, things trying to push the boundaries, and React is on this list.
They're on this list, but you're going to have the kilobytes of React loaded in the browser.
Well, but I mean, again, it depends on what your goal is. If it's not e-commerce, like stuff like what partial does for React is flatten the curve.
Yeah.
Your app might get up to 100 kilobytes or whatever, 120, but then it doesn't get any larger.
Yeah.
So like, it's not just so cut and dry, and especially for larger companies, it's probably like that's probably a win enough. And what I'm getting at is that this is a testimony to how innovative and like ahead of the curve React is. They like basically recognized that this was a problem for them like 7 years ago or 6 years ago, I think, and started along this path because they knew it would take that long. Some of these other frameworks like Marco that was always what they were built for. Marco knew that this is where it was going to go right from the beginning. Kind of like, I mean, it took some time, and
React had to recognize that this pivot would be important to them.
Like, yeah, like 5-6 years ahead, and work everything towards it. And that's essentially, like, I mean, I don't care what you say. I don't, like, when I look at other frameworks, and people wonder why I have such admiration for the core team and like what the work that they do in React, that kind of foresight is like is rare. So I mean, take it or leave it, but like that's the scenario. Anyway, yeah, that's hopefully this was hopefully hydration makes more sense to you and more sense to everyone after this.
I think I can. I mean, it's the same thing with the last one. I'm like, man, I can make a 10-minute video about this, just like these 3 axes. And like, honestly, we need a video that explains to beginners what Next.js actually is. Even if they're going to end up choosing Next.js, they should kind of know what it does.
But yeah, I mean, I can give props to Steve for really trying with some of these graphics to kind of get the message across. It's just like this is very hard, and to kind of show. And as I said, you can understand now why I'm put off a bit by this, because partial can be more partial than progressive, and like it's not a bunch of steps. And I mean, but the truth of the matter is, a lot of the stuff and rhetoric around this makes a ton of sense. Like, so I think this was the image that really set people off on this article.
I mean, this is one where I was like, well, this image doesn't describe all the work that has to happen after the page is ready. That's very interesting.
But the truth of the matter is, what happens after the page is ready is what happens if you client render the app. Because after the page is ready, what you do is you click a button and do something.
Well, no, in this example, you click a button and you load something.
Okay. Yes, right. You're right. This hides Quick's async lazy loading. But if you view this resumable in the terms that I view resumable in a general sense, even though Quick does that progressive loading, but if you ignore progressiveness as part of the equation, like in our Marco example, this is basically what happens. Yeah. He's missing attach the event handlers, but essentially, when we loaded up that Marco 6 example, I mean, it's, I guess you're right. It is kind of,
I mean, this is a good description of resumability, but not really a good description of Quick. And then he later goes on to like explain how Quick actually works.
Right.
But again, I still liked this article. It was a good article. Like,
yeah, I guess, yeah. Or this is Quick if you stop at the hydration time. Because the thing is, the difference with Marco actually is it's get the HTML, download a small portion of the JS, and bind listeners. Technically, Quick has to bind listeners here too.
Quick doesn't really bind listeners according to this article. He says that what it really does is put one listener on the entire DOM and then have a factory function that like does all the event handling.
Right. But like it's that technique of event delegation isn't unique to Quick per se. Like I mean, you see in Quick they have this like on click and it points to some JS, and that's special. But we've been here before, right?
Yeah.
On click, what does Solid do when you do on click? This is it puts some fancy property on the DOM, and when you click the button, it basically, where is it? Delegate events click. Here we go. Like essentially, all we do in Solid is put that one event. I mean, we execute code, but my point is, when it comes to the events, we put that one click handler on the document, and then
and that's because it's expensive to move around event handlers, right?
Or to make a bunch of event handlers is expensive. We only make a single click event handler for your whole app. And what I'm getting at is, we're not the only framework. React does this. Like other frameworks do this. So like, I mean, it's a small detail, but what I was getting at is like, when you say bind event listeners, like I guess there's two halves, right? There's the half where you actually delegate the events, which is what this is, and then there's the half where I did there, where I go click equals whatever. And what I guess what Misko is saying is that click equals whatever is serialized into the DOM. with Quick. So it doesn't have to do that part on Resume. But that part, if you think about it, is literally like a one-liner assignment.
You're saying, yeah, and you're saying that as like Marco does it, and it's not that bad.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's arguable, I would say. But in general, like I think these sort of graphics sort of try to tell the story, and they're getting close because the story is this with resumability. Like if you're going to take one thing away from it, it's that there's a small part of work that happens to say, hey, I'm ready, but that work has nothing to do, very little to do with your application code. It doesn't run your code. It doesn't do anything like that again. So when it is fair enough to say that, like, if you kind of view it in the simple case of like, I get the HTML and I delegate a global event handler, and I make sure that I register those DOM events, or they're kind of written in, like, technically they are serialized into Marco's data, so to speak. As long as you basically, like, the execution of the code is more or less run this, maybe run a few more assignments or something. It's so minimal that all that happens after this point is the rest of the app. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't do that whole hydration thing. Like that's really all, like, the important part. That's why they were trying to show here. I mean, essentially, like, there's so much that you just doesn't happen. I guess I feel maybe my table is better for this, but like, you don't do this, you don't do this, this is optional, and like you do some event handler. It's like, I don't know. Maybe I'm not saying it clear enough, but it
You said it clear enough before.
It really isn't.
Cool.
I do kind of get where Mishko is coming from in terms of it not being hydration, because like it just doesn't do any of that work. Not now and not later. Like, that's the part that I don't feel like is always clear with people. They think of the progressive thing here, and they're like, oh, so it just does the work later. But it's not
the work it does is a lot less work because it's not hydrating anything. It's not running. It's not rerunning any components.
Right. When even with Quick, when those progressive scripts load, at that point, it's just immediately running the code that would.
It's the literal event handler. That's what people don't understand.
Yeah, it's not running hydration at that point. It's actually just continuing. It's like, so from that perspective, like, you could argue that no hydration occurred. Anyway, obviously getting out of the weeds. I don't know if I think we're pretty much at the end of our stream here. I don't think anyone.
Very impressed with my stamina. Just want to say.
Yeah, no, it's like 2:30 in the morning for you. So I appreciate you coming back for the second session for us to dig into this stuff. I
learned a lot. This is super helpful for me.
Yeah, I hope it's helpful for everyone else. And React is rock solid. And I think that these conversations are going to continue for a while now. The thing is, the MPA versus single page app story, the whole app versus site thing isn't quite done yet. I'm an optimist, which is why I wrote that article. But we're just like the static versus dynamic. We're going to be on this fight for a bit now, and it's funny because I even showed that stupid graphic again in my article, like the which one was it? This one, right? And people are like, the remix versus like 11D thing is like arguing about crossing this line, and this line is pretty much collapsed. Like, almost all of these do SSR now. We're going to be arguing about crossing this line, like across here, for years to come. So
yeah, I mean, in the Astro community, people talk about using Astro for SPAs, and there are some benefits, which is just like, I can't explain it because I'm falling asleep, but like,
yeah, I'm actually not sure what the benefit. I mean, we have that obviously Marco,
it's like a DX related.
oh,
You don't
okay.
but it's also like you don't have to run your sorry, the benefit is that your static content appears quicker.
Oh, okay.
When you use Astro to run your SPA and your SPA is made up of a lot of text content, the text content just appears.
Yeah, no, I mean, the only argument I could see for that is the nav,
No, but it's like a lot of my sites, which are like explanatory content with interactive bubbles. That's a great example. It's because it's one page. You don't do a bunch of routing. It's like one ginormous page, but like you want the paragraphs to appear first.
I'm pretty satisfied.
Yeah,
I guess.
Yeah, the thing is, when I think of single page app, you are doing single page app routing at that point, which means that, again, you have this problem. Like there is this nav bar never goes away. So if you use Astro, you have the ability to not hydrate or send the code for this nav bar. But once you get into your island and it's a single page app, like once you have this,
it's like you have to imagine like an SPA without routing, which doesn't make any sense, but whatever.
Then it's not really. I don't understand it. Then it doesn't seem like it's an SPA. I don't.
I have to explain that another time because it's
yeah. So you kind of went on a tangent.
It's a very niche use case.
Like, I'm just like, wait, how is that an SPA? Yeah, yeah. You're gonna have to explain that, I guess, another time.
If you write a solid app and you don't include solid app router, there's your SPA without routing.
But isn't that just the islands architecture? Like, isn't that just?
Never mind.
Yeah. All right, Dan.
This is fun.
2:30 in the morning. Yeah, it was super fun. There's people still watching us, so props to them.
Yeah. People have been messaging me about like throughout the week saying they watched like the yeah, Michael gets what I'm saying. See, I'm not that crazy. Yeah.
I don't know. No, that's good. Yeah, hopefully there's enough content here. I'm amused at least. So
good night, everyone. I love you all.
Yeah, good night, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, not sure what I'm going to stream.
Break next week.
No, next week I there's a stream, and then it's the week after not. So I got to choose what the stream is next week. Got to think about that one. But yeah, until next week. Have a great one.